Hermione should be more surprised, more shocked to have ended up in her current predicament, but she wasn't. Quite frankly, life was already so completely opposite to how she envisioned it going. It would be far more strange to have something go her way. Hermione had been certain that her research was solid. So certain, she hadn't even bothered to arrange for backup to ensure that there would be someone to look out for her in case something went wrong. Besides, the unspeakables worked alone. They each had their place, and Hermione was the only one in her field trained to save her own ass in any case. It was more efficient that way. Lonely, but efficient. Yes, life was certainly not what she had expected it to be. Hermione thought she would make her way through the creature law department of the ministry with a crash, a bang, and a blaze of equality and glory. They wouldn't even hire her. They cited budgets and other such nonsense. Hermione fought it, but what could she really do? Pull a Malfoy. Run to Harry or Kingsley or both and lose what little pride she did have left. So Hermione had taken the position that would hire her and join the Auror department with Ron and Harry. It wasn't all that bad until she broke up with Ron, that is. Hermione and Ron's relationship had been a train wreck in the making. There was too much that was lost during the war. Ron had abandoned them, and Hermione could hardly forget it, and Ron couldn't forgive Hermione for not immediately doing so for his benefit. And the more they fought, the more Harry withdrew from Hermione especially. She couldn't really blame him because Ron would immediately begin to throw accusations of Harry and Hermione sleeping together. And if there was one thing that had changed about Harry after the war, it was that he was done with fighting. Harry was going to do what was best for Harry and go the path of the least resistance. Hermione understood even if it resulted in her near complete isolation. It made it worse that she understood. It made it harder to be angry, and now she just felt empty. And Ron still did not get it. Hermione woke up, went to work, came home, read books, and went to bed. Ron still thought that there had to be someone else, that Hermione was not sneaking out the window to find anyone who wasn't him. He could not grasp the concept that Hermione was just that boring. And those were his exact words. Hermione had put up with it for far too long, and when she heard Malfoy was joining their department, she jumped at the chance. Hermione was finally cutting the cord of their once solid friendship a year into their new jobs. You requested a new partner and you're moving. Hermione let out a resigned sigh as she walked through Grimmauld Place and directed all the last of her belongings into her beaded purse. Yes. I requested Draco Malfoy. Malfoy. Ronald's voice had a pitch only dogs could hear, and Hermione winced before briskly walking away from him to meticulously go through each room to make sure that she had forgot nothing, and Ronald followed with steam pouring out his ears. Well, Hermione, I suspected many things over the years, but you sleeping with the ferret instead of me was not one of them. Hermione stopped dead and turned with murder and rage brewing in the depths of her soul. Ronald actually had the sense to feel a cold jolt of terror. I am requesting Malfoy as my partner not because I am sleeping with him. Hermione marched forward and jabbed her finger into his chest. I'm requesting him because everyone refuses to be his partner. He isn't a complete moron, and he has the added benefit of being one of the few people you, Hermione jabbed again for added emphasis, actively avoid. Because I am breaking up with you, and as your ex, Ronald's mouth dropped open in surprise. I don't have the energy to deal with your bullshit any longer. I am moving out because Harry picked you over me long ago, and I would rather not force him to prove that fact by asking me to leave. Hermione whirled back around and continued her search unhindered. She saw Ronald one more time as she rounded back with the last of the bits and bobs she had missed. Hermione felt a slight twinge of guilt at the despondent expression on his face. We were never really good together, Ron. Hermione watched his passionless nod. You deserve someone who loves the Chudley Cannons as much as you do, and willingly gets up at ungodly hours just to cheer while you play Quidditch and enjoys every minute of it. Not read a book and say, I showed up for you. Isn't that what you wanted? Ron chuckled. And Hermione wryly smiled. I deserve to have someone who likes reading or at least appreciates that I love books and will always spend more time reading than drinking in pubs or having sex. You couldn't pick the Kama Sutra. That's a book I would have immensely enjoyed you reading. I have already read it, Ronald, Hermione snorted with a roll of her eyes. I don't believe you, Ron accused back. I certainly didn't see any evidence of it, because I strongly believe no woman can hold even half of those positions. And Hermione held up a hand. I am certain you couldn't either. Hey, we've been broken up for 5 minutes, and you are already ragging on me for being a bad lay. At least wait till I am gone so I can salvage some of my bruised ego. Ron was smiling for the first time in a while, and Hermione smiled even bigger back. See, we were never meant to be a couple. We have had more fun with the subject of sex in the last 5 minutes than we ever did actually having sex. We could have that much fun, please, Hermione. Hermione slung her beaded bag across her chest and crossed her arms. Ron, Hermione sighed. Do you really want me, or do you just not want to tell your mother? Ron froze. WL, he blustered. Ronald, did you know that Lavender Brown is still single? Ron's eyes widened. And did you also know that she stares with longing and desire for her precious one? Not my words, I assure you. Lavender talks really loud in the loo. Hermione dreaded going to the loo. Heaven forbid she was on the toilet when that particular gaggle of women entered the bathroom. Being stuck while they extensively discussed Ronald's assets, grossly exaggerated in her opinion, and how Hermione was clearly a terrible choice for him. They were not terribly wrong about that. I know she can be a bit obnoxious, but Lavender clearly loved being with you. And for what it is worth, she was very good for your ego, as I recall. Hermione allowed herself a small smile of triumph as he started considering it. You really think so? Well, Ronald, Hermione turned around to get her coat off the peg. I shall gladly leave you to pursue the lovely Lavender. Just promise me you won't be a moron and tell her it was my idea. Hell, tell her you broke up with me because you couldn't get her out of your head. She'll eat it up. I'll reinforce it if she ever comes along gloating. Your mother will be happy that you already have prospects for a new daughter-in-law in her sights, and I can focus on dealing with Malfoy as a working partner and direct all my focus to not killing the twit, Hermione groaned. You really aren't sleeping with Malfoy, Ron grinned. You're an idiot, Ron, Hermione deadpanned. Tell Harry we split amicably and I'll see him around. Thankfully, Ron nodded, and Hermione was able to leave the house relatively peacefully. She really should have waited for Harry, but she wasn't about to test her luck by sticking around. Ron could do the explaining, or Harry could man up and come find her himself. And to his credit, Harry found her. But aside from asking if her relationship was over, said almost nothing other than, see you around. Honestly, their friendship was a crumbling sand castle the minute they left school. Unlike everyone else, Hermione knew it was going to end. Everyone was shocked. Scrambling sycophants came begging for Hermione to spill the tea, and she told them to bugger off. When Ron and Harry were similarly forthcoming, they just made up their own reasons. There had been more than a few articles that presented Hermione in a less than flattering light, not that she cared. It had a few benefits. She no longer had to deal with as many fans of Harry Potter and the Golden Trio. They were idiots for believing the tripe in the newspaper and only gave her some glowering looks and glares for attempting to leave the loyal Ronald to be with the precious boy who lived. Reason number 4 that she had chosen Malfoy for a partner. They were officially the hated ones, and it wasn't as bad as all that. Draco Malfoy was much quieter than he had been when they were younger. He had welcomed Hermione with a raised eyebrow, and that was it. They rarely argued because they rarely talked, and that was perfectly all right with Hermione. Lonely, but what else was new? Her loneliness was what Hermione strongly suspected led the Department of Mysteries to hire her and Malfoy. They didn't have lives, and neither of them had family or relationships to jeopardize their work. And they were brilliant. It was even better when they were sent to different departments. Yes, Hermione's life was completely different from what she had thought it would be. Hermione had originally wanted to make a difference and be one of the names to go down in history. Now, her name would never be put on her research. She was one of the unspeakables. Hermione spent her days researching and testing. No one knew what she did. No one would ever know that Hermione was the one behind her work, and that was strangely all right with her. All Hermione needed was her books and a cat and a cup of tea. Her position in life wasn't the only change. Hermione was a little weirded out that she became a young female version of Mad-Eye Moody. Not that she had lost her eye or constantly yelled at people. Just constant vigilance and all that, and weirdly fashion sense. In truth, it was probably just aura culture that changed the way Hermione dressed. It was the perfect blend of muggle and wizard attire. The aura black leather coat and vest and pocket watch, never without her life's belongings slung across her chest, even when she slept. And Hermione recognized how that was a sign that she was most likely suffering from PTSD. But anyone who blamed her could shove their boot up their ass for all she cared. The profanity that had leaked into her daily conversation was also eerily similar to Moody. And if having her life strapped to her chest made her a paranoid mess, Hermione was all right with that. It gave her peace. And in light of recent events, Hermione would continue to do so until the day she died, because it quite literally saved her from being stranded in the early 1900s with nothing but the clothes on her back and her wand. Still needless to say, Hermione had found herself in yet another pickle, and she was alone in this particular pickle with no one who knew exactly where the hell she was. Precisely because Hermione had no clue where the hell she was. One minute Hermione was testing a time turner that she had been tasked to make, and the next minute she was throwing up in a dusty back alley with a lump of shattered glass and melting metal hanging from her neck. Hermione had never felt worse in her life, and that was saying a lot. Bellatrix Lestrange would be livid to be ousted as her worst experience. When Hermione had finally managed to extract the molten time turner from her neck, she was left with a nasty burn in the shape of it around her neck. She checked her person and found that other than the time turner, everything was where it should be. And thankfully, Hermione had dropped where she had landed unnoticed. She drew her wand and held it out of sight behind her leg before advancing cautiously. Hermione was in some sort of alley and sand filled every crevice, and the heat it was unbearable. When she finally made it to an opening to a busy street, and her eyes widened, it was filled with men and women wearing turbans and coverings. There was the occasional white couple with parasols and straw hats dressed in more clothing than was clearly comfortable. In actuality, Hermione with her black jeans, dragon-hide boots, vest and pocket watch almost fit in with what the men escorting those women were wearing. Aside from her dark color palette, of course, Hermione spied a newspaper stand down the street. She buttoned up her long leather jacket to hide her pants and drew up her hood and walked calmly through the crowd. With her wand in her pocket and her purse under her coat, Hermione kept her head down and focused on making it through the crowd without jostling anyone else. She wasn't entirely successful. Antaby, Lilla, Ein, Aunt Darby. Hermione had accidentally bumped into a snarling, smelly man with a full beard and red fez on his head. "My apologies," Hermione said quietly before again, weaving in and out of the crowd as fast as she could to the newsstand. She was mildly frustrated to find that the newspapers were clearly written in Arabic, and Hermione had only ever learned French and a little bit of Russian. But the date clearly said 1920. Well and truly screwed. That's what Hermione was. Hermione stood vigilant in the entrance of an alley. She watched the crowd in the marketplace. Hermione still had yet to find exactly what she was looking for. She had been observing the crowd's behavior for over 2 hours before she finally spotted her target. A very tall man grasping a wand just out of sight. Hermione followed stealthily and dodged people left and right. The disillusionment was necessary to follow a wizard, but it was beyond difficult to avoid being trampled in the crowded space. More than one individual found themselves tripping over thin air as Hermione attempted to maneuver her way through without losing the Arab wizard. Hermione only prayed he wouldn't notice. Her stalking skills were a little rusty after being in the Department of Mysteries for the last 2 years. Hermione almost lost him as he fell into a wall. She allowed herself to breathe for just a moment before likewise falling into the same wall. Hermione was immensely relieved to be disguised from view when she entered what was clearly a den of iniquity for not-so-reputable wizards. Scantily clad vila were littered throughout the smoky area, along with a myriad of questionable sex partners. Female house elves walked through the space with hardly a stitch on them, carrying trays of drinks. Hermione did a double take upon seeing a centaur in the corner. There were some things she would prefer to never know about, much less see when it came to interracial sexual escapades. Hermione focused on staying out of the way while she stepped carefully through the space. She held the edge of her coat over her mouth. The smoke was thick with a dizzying quality, which was clearly intended to intoxicate its inhabitants and influence the type of behavior that was desirable for a whorehouse. Hermione had been hoping that she would enter into a pub or a coffee house with an attached inn that could offer her some pertinent and helpful information. This was clearly not a place of lodging she was going to find desirable or trustworthy, to say the least. She was, however, hoping that maybe there would be a doorway into a Cairo version of Diagon Alley. Hermione kept her hand to her mouth to stave off the smell of nauseous smoke and edged through the space to a door on the opposite end of the space. Thankfully, her guess was a good one when she exited out into another street and was able to breathe in hot, sandy air yet again. Hermione breathed a sigh of relief to see pots and cauldrons for sale. She stepped into another side alley to lift her spell and walk out into full view. Hermione received several curious glances, but was mostly left alone aside from the occasional vendor that she quickly outran. She breathed a sigh of relief when she finally found the Cairo branch of Gringotts. It was beautiful and familiar, and she knew it would provide her with the information that Hermione needed so long as she paid enough. The goblins sneered. The marble floor shone. She finally felt herself relax before she approached the counter. "I would like to exchange galleons for Muggle currency and discuss potential financial investments." The goblin looked down its long, crooked nose in disdain. "Do you have an account?" "Nope, but I have money to spend." Hermione was not trying to offend the goblin, but she had a feeling making an account would be hard to keep in the future when she eventually robbed them of a cursed goblet and a blind dragon. Therefore, not the best idea. She would do business when she had to, but her money would hardly be safe in the bank in light of the upheaval that was soon to strike the wizarding world anyhow. "Of course," it sneered. "Snaggletooth." The grumpy goblin marched up only to walk off with Hermione barely following. Once they reached the meeting room, she got straight down to business. "I need to purchase a residence in Muggle Cairo." "Then why not go to Muggle Cairo and purchase it?" The goblin narrowed his eyes on her. "Because I came into this country in particular quite unexpectedly and don't have any Muggle connections to speak of. Can I purchase it through you?" The goblin rolled his eyes and passed over a parchment with pictures attached. "Are there any pictures of the inside?" "Not at the moment," the goblin said with a nasty grin. So it was an awful place, probably in the worst part of Cairo, but likely easy to get in and out of, closer to the outskirts and poorly made, therefore easily changed. How much? In light of the current time, the price was no doubt outrageous for the crappiest housing available, but Hermione was no doubt also outrageously rich due to that same inflation. "I'll take it." She could see the triumph and the greedy gleam in the goblin's eyes. He definitely overcharged, but she was going to annoy the hell out of him for it. "And now, I have some questions." Hermione was relentless. She hadn't signed the paperwork even though it was sitting right in front of her. Where was the entrance to the alley? What are the laws for magic and non-magic users? What should I avoid? And so on. Hermione was certain the goblin that was assigned to her was sick of her stupid questions by the time she was finished. She didn't really have much of a choice in the matter, however. A wizard would have seen her suspicious behavior for what it was and immediately alerted the authorities, not that the goblin was unaware. He simply didn't care so long as she paid him accordingly and was in no hurry to let that opportunity go. And Hermione tipped him generously after he assisted her with a map and the deed to a property that she was buying on pictures alone. Not the best decision she had ever made, but Hermione was more concerned about sleeping somewhere safe, and she didn't trust any of the inns to be particularly trustworthy. By the time she was done with the place, Hermione was going to ensure that it was protected, and the rest she could adjust and figure out as she went along. "I'm not a bloody tour guide," the goblin sneered as Hermione made her last request. The goblin was more than a little irritated when Hermione had the audacity to ask him to show her to the property himself. "I am unfamiliar with the area and simply need to ensure I reach the right place." Hermione placed another galleon in his palm. The greedy glint in his eyes took over yet again. "As the Lady Witch desires," he sneered. "Oh, please, be still mine beating heart," Hermione returned dryly. The goblin glared before wrapping himself in robes that disguised his identity, making him appear as a very short man. She paid close attention to every turn, and even more closely to the entrance to the alley. Hermione imagined that he was not particularly happy with her initial request because she had purchased a property in Muggle Cairo, hence the strange robes. Once they reached their destination, Hermione knew that the goblin thought he had pulled one over on her by selling her this particular property. It was run down, and certainly was the worst part of Cairo. It was clearly a nocturne alley of sorts. Hermione could see several unsavory characters loitering around. That was perfectly fine with her. The less respectable people go around asking undesirable questions, the better. It was also not lost on Hermione that she had 4 wars ahead of her. 5 if she counted Muggle World War II, and 6 if she counted the war that would rage between the Middle East and America. Hermione almost wished she had been pushed back even further. There would be less difficulty if she had found herself in the Middle Ages. Merely a matter of living in the mountains and off the land. The goblin led the way into the entrance of her new home. It was dusty and in extreme disrepair. It was truly awful, and in Hermione's opinion, perfect for her needs. Easy to build off of, not like Grimmauld Place. Cleaning that place up had been a nightmare, with gluing spells on house elf heads and attachment charms on screeching portraits. Cursed objects in every corner calling for you to pick them up. Bogarts and magical critters. Hermione smiled as she remembered the look of utter horror on Sirius's dear Mama's face as Hermione brandished her chainsaw. It certainly had not entered the dead witch's plans that a Muggle-born would think to take out the entire wall. Hermione saw that as her crowning moment of genius. The goblin was incredibly disgruntled at the lack of dissatisfaction in his new customer. Snaggletooth had been sniggering at the thought of finally pawing off this awful house on the naive little witch. He was just waiting for her to be affronted and beg to sell it, at a much lower price, of course. And yet it seemed the opposite had occurred. Rather than being horrified, she was pleased. It rankled him and irritated him to no end. "You are pleased with your acquisition, Lady Witch?" Hermione turned a mischievous smile towards him. "Immensely." "I do enjoy a challenge." Hermione handed him another galleon. "May we work together again, and may your gold always shine bright." The goblin startled back at the familiar goblin greeting. "And may you successfully sell fool's gold to many fools," he grinned viciously. "I am sorry that my idea of fool's gold was different from yours," Hermione grinned. "I have no doubt you will successfully trick me next time, clever goblin," Snaggletooth laughed. "I look forward to it, Lady Witch." With that, the goblin apparated with a snap and was gone. Hermione blew out a huge breath. Despite being what she wanted, this place was a colossal mess. Hermione tossed her heavy coat to the side, tied up her hair, and got to work. It took 2 days for Hermione to have her new home exactly as she needed. Fidelius charm, blood wards, and a never-ending list of security measures that again gave her sad memories of Mad Eye. She breathed a sigh of relief when she could finally set up her tent in the still dirty space. Cleaning was clearly the next on Hermione's list, but all she had consumed was granola bars and bottled water. Hermione needed a bath and sleep and healing balm for her burns. She was safe, and now she could rest in comfort thanks to that fact. Hermione stepped into the same tent that Ronald and Harry and her had been on the run in. It was incredibly nostalgic. She had laughed when she came back to find it completely intact and untouched. Everything was in place, if a little dusty. It had felt surreal after all that happened. All the people that were dead. The little radio that they had used to listen to constantly in hopes the names of the friends would not be voiced still sat in the corner. Hermione had never had the heart to change anything. One of the little rooms was filled with everything that she held dear. Her many school books and research. This was home. Hermione was grateful to have it here with her. The healing balm flew into her palm from the depths of her purse, and she hissed as it touched her skin. This was no doubt another magical scar to join the growing number. Hermione also had a large red burn shadow on her back from an ill-fated mission with Ron and Harry that included a dragon and a not-so-successful attempt to apprehend the criminal before he was no more than a ball of flames. Hermione was unsurprised that Ron had left her to fend for herself, and it was only one of many instances that made her fully aware that there was more than Ron's initial abandonment of Harry and her that resulted in Hermione no longer trusting Ronald enough to be a life partner. He simply didn't see her as someone in need of protection, which was true didn't mean Hermione didn't want or need someone to give a flying crap and maybe make even a slight attempt to push her out of the way when a bloody dragon attempts to toast her like crispy bacon. She settled on the bed on her stomach, purse looped through her belt loop, and settled for an uncomfortable but necessary sleep and sighed. Harry was the one she really missed, the one who was there for everything, the lonely nights after Ron's abandonment, the angry crying and vicious whispers of the poisonous Horcrux, the torture. Harry had been there for everything, and Ron's accusations weren't entirely without merit. Hermione loved Harry, loved his loyalty. She loved how humble he was. Hermione hadn't allowed herself to voice when she began to love his curly black hair and kind eyes, or how he sat quietly and just let her read her book instead of babbling endlessly like Ron. How Harry was secretly just as smart as Hermione, and therefore not at all threatened by her own brilliance. The way that Harry had attempted to distract the dragon away from Hermione. She was hopelessly in love with him, but Harry was hopelessly in love with Ginny, and Hermione was not touching that landmine with a 10-foot pole. And she supposed that Ron was adept enough to pick up on that love, even if he was not adept enough to voice it in a way to actually address the issue forthright. Therefore, Hermione really couldn't blame him for his suspicions. She could blame his stupidity for thinking Hermione would go so far as to cheat on him, but everything else, sadly, was a valid concern. That was why she had held on to their relationship for as long as she did. Hermione hoped she could fall in love with Ron. It was a sad day for her when she was fighting with him yet again and realized that she in fact was beginning to hate Ron. He was just so obnoxious, unbelievably irritating and insecure and angry all the time. Sex was awful with him, always about him. Always complaining about everything Hermione loved about herself, comparing her to his insane mother. It was maddening, and Hermione's own hate was the last straw for her. No more. She couldn't do it anymore. Now, though, maybe this was the blessing in disguise Hermione had been hoping for. She was free. Hermione no longer had to worry about running into Ronald. He wasn't even born. And Harry, Hermione could finally let go of him. He was finally sufficiently out of her reach. It was over. She didn't even have to be concerned about running into anyone she would come to know. Even Dumbledore was in England. Hermione was free. Hermione smiled to herself and began imagining what she would do to the house once she woke up. The reading nook she planned to make. The fireplace she would build. Maybe she would even make a cat-climbing structure on the wall. Hermione grinned wildly. She could have a cat again. Ron detested cats. along with everything else that gave her joy. After she was done making her house perfect, Hermione would buy the fluffiest cat she could find, after she had ensconced herself in the best library available, of course. Hermione snuggled her face back down into her pillow and breathed deeply. Now that she was set up in a safe place, it wasn't that dire a situation after all. Hermione woke up rested and ready for a shower. But that was not meant to be. The gremlins were wreaking havoc in her mind. She had to deal with the dusty mess outside her comfy tent. And what would be the point of showering if she was going to be a sweaty mess again immediately afterwards? Hermione scarfed down yet another granola bar from the depths of her purse and got down to work, scourgifying floors and repairing broken cement. She was going to need to do some serious work here. As soon as the place was at the very least clean, Hermione set to work expanding it sufficiently to meet her primary needs. She needed a second floor. Hermione was grateful that she read a great many books on a great many topics. This project would be tedious and incredibly difficult otherwise. Heavens knew that she would never be able to have a muggle in here when she was finished. They were going to have a heart attack. Hermione needed supplies. She could grab one of each thing she needed, then multiply them, maybe expand and enlarge them if needed. With the space large and clean, Hermione began making her list for the necessary supplies and decided that now she could get ready to be seen by the muggle public. Hermione stared at the new scar that had formed on her chest. It overlapped with the purple scar that she had received in the ministry all those years ago. Her body was a mess. It was no wonder that Moody was a misshapen disaster after so many years. Being an aura and actively getting into magical trouble, it was impossible to hide. This was depressing. Hermione shook herself out of those thoughts with a jerk of her head and immediately jumped into the shower. It was beautiful, warm, rejuvenating. She dressed in her now standard clothing and headed out into the Dargy alley. Hermione's hooded and shadowy form blended in with the vagrants she could see in the alley. It was when she went out into the everyday markets of Cairo that she began to feel slightly out of place. The sun was bright and the merchants' goods colorful. The smell of exotic spices filled the air deliciously. The majority of the crowd wore light-colored clothing to offset the brilliance of the sun. If it weren't for her cooling charm, she no doubt would have been sweating a storm. But being a witch, Hermione was perfectly comfortable in the brilliant heat. There was the occasional man or woman shrouded and covered similarly to her in their traditional garb. There were so many items for sale, Hermione was completely overwhelmed and dazzled. Jewelry and painted pots, antiques and artifacts, stolen or faked, carpets and mats, and the food. Hermione never did get much of an opportunity to try foreign cuisine. Hogwarts was very static, delicious, but static. She stopped to purchase mouth-watering sweet bread and fruit. It was going to be absolutely delicious after her recent diet. Hermione walked around aimlessly, observing and dedicating the prices and goods to memory. She would have to decide whether the wizarding goods were better priced than the muggle ones. Hermione stopped when she saw a grandiose building suddenly in front of her, Cairo Museum. She felt her first rush of real excitement. Hermione paid her fee at the door and meandered slowly through the exhibits. It was absolutely amazing. She hadn't been to a museum in years. Not since a year or two before her parents' memories were wiped. And when she saw a sign signaling a library, it was like a dream come true. Hermione frowned at hearing yelling that would have had Madame Pomfrey in an absolute conniption. "You insulted our greatest patron." "I didn't mean to, honestly." "You called him a babbling baboon, Miss Carnahan." Hermione couldn't stop the smile that spread across her face. Professor McGonagall would be proud. She walked cautiously and quietly into the library to see a well-groomed gentleman with a fez berating a younger woman, conservatively dressed with her curly hair pulled into a bun. He was going on and on about how disgusting the Egyptian rituals were and how all the grisly mummies should be set on fire rather than put on display along with all that gold, and he was just disrespectful. "I mean, this is the man you want to fund the museum." a man who would disrespect the bodies of the dead. It doesn't matter the morals of the money, so long as it does a good thing. I disagree. I don't care what you think. You're the bookkeeper. Don't be here next time he comes in, or else. The man came storming by only to see Hermione standing calmly with her hands clasped in front. Dr. Bay didn't know what came over him, but he felt a shiver of apprehension. The woman in front of him was imposing. A threat. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. Her clothes were unfeminine aside from an out-of-place pink, beaded bag slung across her body. The rest of her was all black and red. No makeup and just a simple braid. But her eyes were serious and intelligent. They spoke of knowledge. And there was simply a feeling in the air around her. Dr. Bay ignored his fear and pulled himself up straighter. "May I help you, madame?" Dr. Bay said loftily. "No, thank you," Hermione replied frostily in her perfect British accent. "I shall get help from the bookkeeper with morals. They tend to have better taste in literature and are far better company. Excuse me." Hermione ignored the man's affronted expression and waved the silence charm off her heels for an added effect. Evelyn looked in surprise as a woman in her late 20s firmly put the revered doctor in his place. "Good afternoon," Hermione smiled pleasantly. "I'm looking for some books that will help me to learn Arabic. Some books on ancient Egyptian wouldn't be remiss, either." "I would love to help you," Evelyn began apologetically. "But the books here don't tend to be educational so much as scholarly. I would recommend a tutor, and hopefully they would have the literature that you need to learn." Hermione suddenly smiled brightly. "Do you know Arabic and ancient Egyptian?" Of course, but I've never taught before." "Oh, Posh," Hermione waved off her concern. "There is always a day to start. Unless, of course, you don't want to, then of course I'll look for someone else. And to be frank, I have already decided I like you. You remind me of a much younger version of one of my professors at my boarding school, and I would love to get to know you better." I don't know what to say," Evelyn blushed prettily. "Really," Hermione assured. "Please don't feel like you have to accept. I just find when someone puts their passion above money, it is always a sign of a valuable person. And unfortunately, someone that gets pushed aside because their morals make it inconvenient for certain people to get what they want as quickly as they want it. Which is a shame because they do make the best friends." Hermione smiled hopefully. Evelyn bit back a laugh. She knew exactly who the certain people the woman was referring to. Evelyn was sorely tempted to accept the companionship the woman was offering. She could admit it was difficult living in Egypt. The only real connections she had were Jonathan and Dr. Bay. And with Dr. Bay being so harsh and Jonathan running off every other month, it was getting to be quite lonely. The young woman in front of her was older and clearly didn't follow any social standard she knew of. First, with mouthing off to Dr. Bay, and second, with her fashion being quite forward. Evelyn could already admit that she quite liked her as well. "Oh, well, all right. I'd love to teach you. I'm Evelyn Carnahan." Evelyn held her hand out with a shy smile. Hermione smiled even bigger back. "Hermione Evans, it is wonderful to meet you. I'll go grab us some books, and then we'll pop off. The patron in question is dropping by latter, as you know. I am not supposed to be here." "Should we study at your lodgings?" Hermione hesitated. "My lodgings are in a questionable part of town. Do you mind terribly if we study at your lodgings? I wouldn't want you to be uncomfortable." Evelyn nodded with concern. "All right." Evelyn bustled about collecting the books and the materials they would need before putting on her sweater and pinning her hat to her hair. Hermione picked up half the books, and they set off into the desert heat. Dr. Bay watched the two of them leave with disbelief and irritation. There was something off about that woman. Evelyn was living in a decently posh part of Cairo. Her apartment was clearly a bit smaller than the ones adjacent, but she was clearly well off. There were smaller artifacts on display throughout the home. Hermione could clearly see the love of history and books clearly throughout the home. It really was her kind of place. "Your home is lovely," Hermione complimented. Evelyn smiled brightly. "Thank you. It's me and my brother's when he decides to be in town." Right now, I believe he is on a dig, but he also could just be at the local Casper, drinking the night away with the Foreign Legion. Evelyn suddenly blushed with embarrassment. She had gotten so excited that she had rushed and practically admitted her brother was a layabout. You should have seen my housemates at boarding school, Hermione smiled. They would sneak alcohol in from the neighboring town, and there wouldn't be a sensible conversation to be had for at least a day or two while they nursed their hangovers. Evelyn breathed a sigh of relief and gave Hermione a grateful smile. Though even when they were sober, it was not exactly like I was sharing a room with Al. W. William Shakespeare. Hermione almost had a mental sputter and said Albert Einstein, but she wasn't entirely certain where Albert Einstein stood in the current academic world. Hermione vaguely recalled that he came to popularity around this time, but the Muggle world and its history really had been put on the back burner in recent years. She was going to have to comb through her books to make sure that she didn't screw up royally. I struggled with my roommates too. They really had no appreciation for history and archaeology, Evelyn stated sadly. And they were quite mean because of who my mother was. It was no secret that she was an Egyptian, and there really was much to be desired as far as friendship went. Sathi were mean little shits. Hermione, Evelyn was scandalized. Sorry, Hermione grinned. It's been a while since I cared to watch how I talked. I had a similar situation in school. I was one of the scholarship students, and there were a lot of higher status parents who didn't like us being there, made quite the stink about it. I got over caring for the opinions of others real quick. The mood was dipping quickly. So, Arabic or Egyptian first? Evelyn was taken aback by the quick change of topic, but was happy for it nonetheless. Arabic, Evelyn said cheerfully. Absolutely incredible. You are learning so quickly. I promise you I'm not. I've just studied a language that is a bit close in structure. Namely, Hermione had studied ancient runes, but that was not exactly something she could really explain. Well, Evelyn beamed, I don't think you will need that much help. Your pronunciation needs some work, and of course we will need to work on writing, but you are going to be the best first student I could ever have hoped for. We should start out by just talking in Arabic. You will become proficient in no time. Thank you, Evelyn. So, should we go out for a meal? I'm starving and I just got here. I have no idea where to go. Oh, Evelyn smiled bashfully. I don't know that many places either, but I'm sure we could find a decent meal at one of the hotels. Let me go get dressed. Evelyn started for her room before abruptly stopping and turning back to Hermione with hesitation. Except Hermione raised an eyebrow. If being Malfoy's work partner had taught her one thing, it was the power of an elegantly raised eyebrow. I'm fairly certain they won't allow you to wear trousers. Could I lend you a skirt? Hermione couldn't hold back her surprise or the scrunch-up nose that signified her distaste. Do I have to? I'm afraid so. Evelyn smiled apologetically. Evelyn was clearly miffed with Hermione's solution. Hermione had stolen one of her red, split riding skirts and essentially just put it on over her pants and buttoned her black leather coat over it. She looked almost exactly the same as she had before. Evelyn raised her eyebrows in disbelief. Well, I'm wearing a skirt. Hermione grinned mischievously and triumphantly. You enjoy finding ways around the rules, don't you? Evelyn said with amusement. Only when the rules make absolutely no sense. I see. Hermione was in no hurry to go into exactly how she found her ways around the rules in the past, not that she really could without being thrown in wizard prison. Hermione followed Evelyn closely out into the street. They didn't go far, and Hermione did have to hand it to her. She was right about wearing the skirt. They entered the restaurant, and there wasn't a single local. Only a bunch of stuck-up tourists wearing ridiculously long skirts, the women, of course. Hermione had to meaningfully take off her black coat when the host looked at her skeptically, and he only looked mildly less scandalized to see the long red skirt over her black pants and boots. Hermione didn't even think about how strange it would be when she tied the arms of her coat around her waist instead of handing it over to the coat room attendant. The upper-class patrons looked at Hermione as if she was some sort of uncouth street urchin, as they finally sat down. Thankfully, Evelyn found it amusing more than anything else. "I'll have to introduce you to Jonathan when he is next in town. He will like you." Hermione was careful to follow Evelyn's lead. She put a napkin on her lap in the same manner as Evelyn. She made certain to allow Evelyn to order first and followed her lead. In short, Hermione's manners were impeccable by example. "The question is, will I like Jonathan? He grows on you, but at first he will make you crazy. Just keep an eye on your pocketbook," Evelyn warned with a heavy sigh. "Duly noted," Hermione chuckled. Evelyn was relieved to have found a kindred soul in Hermione and a steadfast friend. She came by the museum every single day. Her conversation was interesting, and aside from very cryptic answers about her life before Cairo and where exactly in Cairo she lived, Hermione was very forthcoming. Evelyn really liked her. Dr. Bay clearly did not. "Oh, you again?" Terence was not pleased at all to the ever-present thorn in his side again for what felt like the 100th day in a row. "Oh, the esteemed Dr. Bay." Hermione gave him a flourishing and clearly mocking bow. "How kind of you to bestow your liege's mighty aura on us common peasants. However shall we return your wonderful favor to us?" "Cheeky brat," Dr. Bay growled before storming away to his office and closing the door behind him with a resounding slam. "Oh, Hermione, must you irritate him so?" Evelyn sighed as she put up the last of her work things. "Nima. Yajib Ile. Yes, I must. Your pronunciation is improving," Evelyn said with pride. "I am happy to say it is. And as for Dr. Bay, I am sorry if my attitude affects you negatively. He rubs me the wrong way, Dr. Bay is exactly like an old professor of mine, and it really makes me want to anger him in ways I didn't have the courage to as a child. Dr. Bay and Severus Snape would have either loved each other or killed each other." "Oh, don't worry about that. It is entertaining," Evelyn whispered, "and continues to keep me entertained when he is yelling at me, which frustrates him to no end." "Marvelous. Now are you free?" Hermione said with a grin. "Jonathan," Evelyn grinned with excitement. "Jonathan is in town. Please come to dinner with us." "I desperately want to introduce the two of you." Hermione raised an eyebrow. "He isn't going to pick my pocket, is he?" "Oh no, number probably." "I heard that, Evelyn." Jonathan had struck out again. "Rotten of that Carter fellow having all the luck." Sure, the curse was following them, but that was nothing in the face of all that gold. Well, at least he would see the old girl again, and just as important, get a decent drink again. Evie had uncharacteristically asked him to come to one of the local cafes. It had excellent coffee, but Evie hardly got out enough to find that out. They almost always met in one of the stuffy hotels. The upside was they had excellent liquor, and the downside being less than excellent company. So coffee, he would have to wait for the excellent liquor. Jonathan even rushed forward to embrace Jonathan with even more exuberance than usual. "Evie, how lovely to see you." "Oh, Jonathan, I have so much to tell you." Of course, old girl. But first, could you take a look at this artifact? Maybe show it to that curator of yours. I promise, mint condition and absolutely spiffy." "In a moment, Jonathan," Evie sighed with resignation. "First, I want you to meet someone." Jonathan lost his breath as he imagined the worst. Please, heavens, let it not be a beau. He couldn't handle his baby sister running off with some cad. Thankfully, the person Jonathan was met with was not a dashing and debonair devil, but a naturally beautiful young woman. The black leather and skin-tight pants were delightful. Her lively and curly hair framed a face devoid of rogue with shining, mischievous light brown eyes. Well, thank heavens. I nearly had a heart attack thinking Evie would introduce me to her fiancé. Instead, she introduced me to my new fiancé. Hermione snorted with amusement, and Evie smacked Jonathan playfully but hard. "Now, old girl, was that really necessary? I really am relieved. Lovely to meet you. I'm Jonathan Carnahan." Jonathan held his hand to the lovely angel of darkness, and she took his hand with a black leather-gloved hand. "Hermione Evans. Charmed. Likewise, so long as you don't try to pick my pocket." "Evie." Jonathan turned to Evie in mock offense. What lies have you been spinning about me? I am the picture of decorum. I told her the truth, Jonathan. You can hardly blame me. I am not losing my best friend to your nonsense. Evelyn blushed bright red at the admission she had made. She glanced quickly in embarrassment to Hermione, but was immensely relieved to find her smiling brightly back at her. Don't worry. It will take more than a thieving brother to chase me away. Evelyn was ecstatic. It was an underestimated pleasure having a real friend. She had never felt anything like it. Jonathan saw Evie's shy happiness. It had been tough for the old girl, living alone while he ran off leaving her to work in the museum with Dr. Bay and that stick he had shoved up his ass. Oh, sure. Jonathan took comfort in the fact that Bay would never dare to fire Evie due to their parents' influence, even in death. But the old coot did rag on the poor thing so. It most definitely didn't help that Jonathan kept pawning off the pieces of junk he struggled to dig up to make a living on her to sell for him. So, Jonathan, Evie began. What is the artifact you have found? Jonathan had enough awareness to be embarrassed. His sister would see right through him, and even though he had just met her, he had a feeling Hermione would also know that he was full rubbish. Well, it may not be the best thing to find, but I hope it is at least enough for the curator to put in the museum. Jonathan pulled out an Egyptian painting on papyrus. He knew it wasn't truly worth anything. A pretty fake, or more palatable, a creative rendition of a real artifact. Jonathan, you and I both know this isn't a real artifact. You didn't find any meaningful artifacts in all the time since I last saw you. Jonathan had found many meaningful experiences with women with meaningful assets. Meaningful artifacts, not so much. He had tried, but got bored awfully quick. And Jonathan felt justified when none of the other archaeologists found anything of worth, either, after spending far more time wasting their own time. Hermione gently took the papyrus out of Evelyn's hand. It was pretty, colorful renditions of an Egyptian goddess. Clearly fake, as Evelyn said, but pretty nonetheless. Hermione had finally begun finishing the structure of her home, built in bookshelves, a cat-climbing structure that covered an entire wall, a spiraling staircase that led to even more bookshelves, and a giant, tasteful curtain that covered the entrance to her bedroom. She had a tiny kitchen area and a giant bathtub that was more of a pool. All that Hermione could possibly dream of in a house. But she had wanted to get some pictures for the walls and was missing furniture, and it was quite a pleasing painting despite its lack of authenticity. Hermione exited her ruminating to realize that the siblings were mid-argument. Jonathan, you can't honestly expect me to bring another obviously fake piece of junk to Dr. Bay. The last time I did that, I thought he was going to have my head. Does it really hurt to try, old girl? I promise to make it up to you. That's what you said last time, Jonathan. And I'll buy it. The two of them turned to Hermione in disbelief before, and even more so when she handed over a decent amount of money. I've been looking for artwork to put on my walls, and honestly, I quite like it. I say, that's mighty good of you, Jonathan exclaimed happily. Hermione, this is far too much. Evelyn attempted to snatch some of the money to hand back to Hermione, but was clearly struggling to get it from Jonathan before he put it in his pocket. Hermione smiled big at the clear sibling wrestling match going on across from her. Don't worry. I really have taken a liking to it, and I promise not to buy every piece of junk that Jonathan brings around. I'll even give a scathing review next time, no matter what he brings before me. Hermione, Evelyn chastised. That's hardly the point. Jonathan took advantage of Evie's distraction and placed a firm kiss on her cheek before running off. Well, Evie, I have to be popping off. Lovely meeting you, Hermione, he called out while briskly walking down the street. Jonathan. Come back here right this instant. Hermione laughed loudly while Evie attempted to apprehend the fleeing Jonathan. Hermione did like the cad. Every time that woman walked into the museum, it was like a shock to the good doctor's system. The hairs on his arm would stand up, and it was like he could feel her presence. And there she was, smiling with amusement now. not smirking at him as if it was all a big joke with him being the butt of it. And Dr. Bay knew. He knew Hermione Evans was aware of exactly what she was doing. And frankly, he was right. Hermione took tremendous joy in tormenting him, not that it was all that difficult, or that she really understood why her presence bothered the man so much. Doctor Bay just must have instinctively known that Hermione was a witch and was incapable of understanding exactly what about her was putting him on edge, and it was undoubtedly driving him crazy. Or he could just dislike her for no good reason. Professor Snape never liked her for no good reason. Doctor Bay cursed in Arabic as his hair stood on edge yet again, and there she was right at his elbow. Good afternoon, Mr. Bay. That was the other thing. She constantly insisted on calling him Mr. It is Doctor, Miss Evans. Dr. Bay insisted for what felt like the 1000th time. Those words I heard you say just now sounded so charming, Doctor. What do they mean? I'm sure such a learned man such as yourself wouldn't dare curse, and I'm curious as to their meaning. Dr. Bay glared at her and rudely didn't answer. Miss Carnahan is in the library, he grunted and began to walk away. As charming as always, Mr. Bay, Hermione called after him. She laughed to herself as he again uttered several curses to Allah. Hermione made her way to the library. Now she saw the reason for all the time Ron and the twins had spent taunting Draco Malfoy. It was wonderful fun. When the person deserved it, of course. Hermione made it just in time to see Evelyn trip on her own skirt and faceplant on the ground amidst a shower of paperwork. Hermione rushed forward to make sure she was okay. Oh, Hermione, hello. Evelyn looked flustered and her forehead was a little red, but overall, all right. Evelyn, I've only ever met one other person as clumsy as you, and they had the assistance of several mean-spirited students a majority of the time. I don't know how you manage to get into so much trouble when you are all alone. The answer is beyond us both, I assure you, Hermione. Evelyn brushed off her skirt and sighed at the scattered paperwork. They both scrambled to put it back into an orderly pile. Doctor Bay is not going to be happy if he walks in on this, Evie flustered as she hurried to tidy up. I'm sure you have a few moments to breathe, Hermione reassured. I ran into him on my way here, and he always tries to avoid repeating that esteemed pleasure. I don't understand why you goad him, Doctor. Bay would like you just fine if you didn't tease him so much. Hermione rolled her eyes. I doubt that greatly, seeing as how I don't like him either, and that fact is out for all to see. Evelyn began to sort the papers on a nearby desk. This will take forever, Evelyn sighed. Let me help, Hermione pressed. It won't take that long, and I can deliver them to the esteemed Dr. Terence Bay when we are finished so you can get to your other work. Do you have a lot left to do? No, not much. Thank you, even though I know you are only offering so that you can make Dr. Bay uncomfortable. I can have two separate motivations at the same time, can I not? Hermione grinned. Terence, Adam, it is wonderful to see you. And this is my eldest nephew. Dr. Bay looked at the still boyish form of his nephew Ardith Bay. He was still awaiting the growth spurt that would transform him into a muscular man, but Terence and Adam were certain it would come soon with him already being 18. How is your training going? It is going well, Uncle, Ardith said with a slight bow. He becomes more skilled every day. Adam looked at his son with pride, and Ardith blushed at the positive attention. Ardith is accompanying me to learn all that he shall need to govern the tribe. It is never too early, Terence solemnly agreed. What is it that you summon me to discuss? Adam had been concerned, to say the least, to receive Terence's letter. It must be urgent if it could not wait until our regular family meal. I'm not certain it is urgent, but there is a woman who has begun to be friendly with my bookkeeper, and I'm afraid she may be more than she appears. A woman, Adam returned skeptically. She feels she carries an aura that is like Hamanaptra. Adam breathed in sharply at the connection that Terence was making. I can't explain it any other way. I would just feel more comfortable having more information about her. I've attempted to gain some understanding from conversation with Evelyn Carnahan, but that has not been overly helpful. Have you attempted to get to know her? Ask her some subtle questions. Adam questioned. Terence's expression turned dark. Our first meeting was not a good one, and since then she has made it her personal mission to irritate me. The awful woman calls me Mr. Bay, among other things, Terence said with great irritation. Maybe she forgets, Adam attempted to reason. No, Terence returned vehemently. She does not. You can see it in her eyes. She knows. She is absolutely the most infuriating woman I have ever come across. And I work with Evelyn Carnahan, who can't walk across a flat surface without tripping or dropping or knocking something over. She is the most disrespectful little chit. Adam couldn't help chuckling with amusement. Ardith watched and listened silently while his uncle grew more and more heated. How bad could one woman be? Well, that isn't terribly polite, Terence swore in shock and surprise as Hermione was suddenly at his elbow. Woman, how do you do that? Adam had reached for the hilt of his sword in alarm at the sudden voice and was shocked to find none other than their topic of conversation. Do you not know how to knock? Terence continued with frustration. It is a trade secret, and yes, in fact, I do know how to knock. Hermione held up the papers, and how to deliver a stack of papers. If you were not too busy bemoaning what a disrespectful little chit I was, you may have heard that knock. Or not, because Hermione never knocked and never intended to. Mr. Bay. Hermione held out the papers meaningfully, and Terence snatched them with a glare. He waited for her to walk out. Hermione continued to stand there calmly staring at him with hands clasped primly in front of her. Adam knew what Terence was talking about. Her presence was hair-raising, like lightning was about to strike. Ardith was slack-jawed. His father hadn't let go of his sword. Ardith felt his heart beat faster as the tension was palpable. Should he prepare to draw his sword as well? Ardith could see his uncle's nervousness and his father's tension, but the woman in question just continued to smile. Well, Terence questioned shrilly, what are you waiting for? Leave, you didn't say the magic words, Hermione said serenely. What magic words? Adam prepared for something to happen, something awful. Terence was right. There was something off about her. Thank you, thank you. Terence was absolutely flabbergasted. You're welcome, Hermione said brightly. Nice meeting you, she said to the desert warriors, and left without another word. Do you understand now, brother? Terence said, with no little amount of disbelief. To say the least, Adam replied as he let go of his sword. Ardith had received his first task. He was nervous, but determined to succeed. Ardith did his absolute best to blend into the shadows of the alley across the street from the museum. He had a clear view of the entrance. It was impossible to miss the two British women as they exited and followed at as far a distance as possible. Ardith was uncertain what alarmed his uncle and father about Miss Evans. He didn't feel what they were speaking of, but Ardith had also not been allowed to guard the secret city. Maybe he would understand what they spoke of when he did. Instead, Ardith only felt nervous. This was Ardith's first trip to the city, and he had never seen the faces of any men or women outside their village. He had found the light color of her eyes and hair pleasing, like honey. The British woman had been playful, rude, but you could see the life in her face. Ardith had struggled with understanding the English. He had been studying. It was necessary to warn people from entering Hamunaptra, but he was far from fluent yet. It was one of the many reasons Ardith had hesitated to accept the task. There is no better way to get to know the city than to follow someone. I understand your reluctance, but it will be impossible for me to follow her. Miss Evans looked more at me than you. I was not even wearing my face covering. Plus, she might not even have noticed you were here. You are slighter, which is much better to blend into the crowd. I know you will do well, my son. Ardith wanted to please his father, so he went. It was easy at first. The two women stopped at a cafe and drank coffee. Talked. It was dull. Ardith was too afraid to sit down in the cafe. That was too close. So, as casually as possible, he inspected goods at the neighboring vendors. There was a boy following her wearing the same clothing as the man with Mr. Bay at the museum. Coincidence? Hermione thought not. He was not very good at it. The boy was looking through a woman's clothing stall with an incredibly bored expression. He clearly did not want to be there. "You are distracted today, Hermione." Evelyn stopped her explanation of the role of Osiris in the underworld. "I'm sorry," Hermione said apologetically. She had a light bulb moment. "I just can't stop thinking about those lovely clothes across the way. Shall we take a look?" "You want to look at clothes?" Evelyn responded skeptically. "Evelyn, you must know that clothes are my greatest passion," Hermione said with fake sincerity. "Yes," Evelyn commented dryly. "You have displayed that frequently by wearing the exact same outfit every day that I have known you." "Then," Hermione reasoned, "it is clear that I need a new outfit." Hermione placed money for their coffee on the table, and Evelyn followed her with a raised eyebrow. Ardith was completely taken aback. One moment he was looking critically at a poorly made bracelet, and the next he was panicking as the woman he was tasked to follow was clearly walking with purpose toward him. Ardith could hardly make a run for it without letting Miss Evans know what he was up to. He held his breath and deliberately stared at the bracelet as hard as he could and picked another up as if to compare the two. Hermione veered at the last minute to some long, sleeveless robes right behind the boy. "So, Evelyn, do you think that I could get away with wearing one of these over my pants rather than that skirt you lent me? Or will the hotel turn me away for being a blasphemous heathen?" "I don't suppose they would," Evelyn considered seriously. "But you will get even more glares than you already have because it is much more akin to traditional Egyptian clothing. Not that I mind. I find your antics to be fairly amusing." "Yes," Hermione rolled her eyes. "Heaven forbid you actually know you are not in England." She gave the robe actual consideration. What was merely a tool to observe the boy loitering at the other end of stall was actually growing on her. Hermione took off her leather coat and passed it to Evelyn and pulled on the traditional Egyptian robe. It was a dusty red. She quite liked it. "What do you think?" Hermione did a silly twirl. "I actually like it," Evelyn smiled. "I do too," Hermione said seriously. She saw the boy take a glance at her as well before he saw her looking back and placed the figurine he was previously examining down quickly and picking another up. Hermione paid the vendor before putting on her leather coat back over her new robe. "Well, Evelyn, I'd best be going." "Arabic lessons tomorrow. I thought we were going to go to my apartment to study today," Evelyn said a little disappointed. "Could we do it tomorrow? I forgot about something important I need to take care of." "Of course. I will see you tomorrow," Evelyn sighed. "I'll bring a treat to make up for it," Hermione promised Evelyn with a hug before walking off at a brusque pace. It was so quick and abrupt that Ardith only barely managed to chase after her. Evelyn thought it was strange that the boy ran off the minute that Hermione did, but didn't think anything more of it. Maybe he just had a liking for Hermione or wanted to ask her something. He had hardly seemed dangerous. Miss Evans was walking so fast and taking so many turns Ardith could only barely keep track of her. He only just managed to follow her into the building she eventually entered, but immediately froze in shock at what he had walked into. It was a brothel. Ardith froze in terror. Barely dressed women were everywhere. There was no sign of Miss Evans, and several women were already approaching him. "First time, Habib. Don't worry, we don't bite unless you like that." Ardith gulped and jumped as one of the women stroked his arm. "We will make you feel really nice, Habib." Ardith panicked, and he turned tail and ran. Ran until he saw somewhere he recognized and made his way back to the museum. He was absolutely embarrassed and ashamed to have failed so quickly. And Ardith had absolutely no idea where Miss Evans had even gone. Had he walked through the wrong door? Did he lose her at some point? Ardith didn't think so, but she wasn't in there. And since he had run away and couldn't remember where he had been, it was a moot point. Now he had to go back to his father and uncle and admit to his failure. Hermione was absolutely hysterical with laughter. Let him go back and tell Dr. Terence Bay where Hermione had been. Merlin, that was a stroke of brilliance on her part. Though she hadn't planned on giving the poor boy a panic attack. He looked absolutely stricken from what Hermione could see from her hiding place in an alcove just inside the door. And when the women had come forward, he made like a banana and split. Hermione disillusioned herself in case he had decided to wait outside for her, but she saw no sign of him. Still, she remained hidden until she reached magical Cairo. "You ran," Terence screeched. "From a group of women. What were they, demons?" "Terence," Adam chastised. "Why don't you go back to your work and let me deal with this?" "But Adam, this is absolutely ludicrous." "As I recalled, Terence," Adam interrupted sternly, "I am the chief, not you. And you will go and allow me to speak alone with my son." "Of course," Terence said tightly, before marching off, muttering angrily. Adam stood up and closed the door behind him to give them a semblance of privacy. Ardith was thoroughly cowed and had his head down in shame. "I am sorry, my son. I deserve it. I failed. And you will fail many more times in your life," Adam reasoned. And as for Terence, he snorted. Terence conveniently forgets that it was he who thought it would be a grand idea to ride 2 camels at once and vaulted head first into your grandfather's tent during an important council when they suddenly stopped. Ardith's mouth twitched slightly. "So you really ran away?" Ardith sighed and nodded. Adam began laughing. "It isn't funny, father." Adam began laughing even harder. "I wonder if Miss Evans knew you were following her," he chuckled. "Considering how she treats your uncle, I can just imagine her doing it just so you would have to report back to him about it." Adam clapped his son on the shoulder. "I really am sorry. We shouldn't have thrown you head first into your first task without proper training. Miss Evans is definitely not ordinary. I and Terence clearly underestimated her. It is our fault, not yours." Ardith didn't feel that way. It was a thoroughly humbling experience. "However, I do reserve the right as your father to never let you forget this experience. You will never hear the end of it. You're going to tell Mother, aren't you?" Ardith sighed. "And you know that your mother will tease you in front of anyone and everyone." Ardith looked at him in horror. "Lackner is going to make me miserable," Ardith groaned and put his head down in his hands. Adam continued to laugh and clapped him one last time on the back. "You will be fine. You haven't made nearly enough mistakes in life. It was merely your turn, Ardith. Let's head back to the village. We need to recruit one of the more seasoned warriors to follow Miss Evans around. Hopefully they will have more luck." Ardith followed after his father to prepare for the journey. "These are delicious, Hermione. Please cancel on me more often." Evelyn was absolutely in love with the blueberry and chocolate croissants that Hermione had presented to her upon entering her abode. "I'm glad they turned out well," Hermione smiled. "I had to make 2 or 3 batches to get it right." For some reason, the blueberries were making the dough too gooey. "You made these," Evelyn said with surprise. "That's marvelous. I wish I could bake. It was never deemed proper by my father. Or he just didn't want the house to be burned down," Hermione teased. "I wish I could be offended, but you're probably right," Evelyn returned quite seriously. Hermione was glad that she had Evelyn. If it weren't for her, Hermione would be completely alone. Learning to bake, getting fat from said baking, and reading books non-stop with no one to discuss them with. Now that she thought of it, Hermione had been so caught up with learning Arabic from Evelyn that she hadn't bought that cat. "We should go shopping tomorrow." "Continuing to pursue your greatest passion," Evelyn grinned. "Sadly, no. I want to get a cat." Evelyn surged forward with excitement. "I know just where to go." Several hours later, they were walking through the back alleys of Cairo. "We are going to get there before the sun falls tonight," Hermione said a bit tiredly. "Yes, yes," Evelyn responded with frustration. "There is a place near the edge of town where the strays congregate, and I'm sure you would rather have one of them than pay some vendor an awful amount of money." "The money doesn't bother me," Hermione sighed. "But I do like the idea of homing a cat that nobody else wants." "I thought so," Evelyn said triumphantly. "I'd still like to get there before the sun falls, and I have to knee the miserable, drunken slob who attempts to grope you. We will get there soon." "And why wouldn't he be groping you?" Evelyn argued. "Men don't like me," Hermione snorted. especially with your lovely self as an option. Nonsense, Evelyn said, with a bright blush taking over her face. Hermione finally began to see a cat every now and then. They were entering an area with very large warehouses. Why are they here in particular? The business owners around here occasionally feed them, so they stick around to take care of the rats, Evelyn explained. She pulled out her big bag and pulled out a small baggie with dried fish. The minute that Evelyn's treats were lifted into full view, there were cats everywhere. She poured a small amount on the ground, and the ground was swarming with cats rubbing up against their legs. See any you like? Hermione watched them carefully before she spotted an incredibly skinny cat staring at them from a distance. It was black, and Hermione could see several injuries on it, including a missing ear. Hermione took some food out of the bag and approached slowly, only stopping to sit on the ground when it looked like the cat was going to make a run for it. She waved off any other cat that tried to approach, and they all left her alone when Evelyn poured some more food on the ground in front of her. It took several minutes of silent coaxing with food before Hermione was able to firmly grab the cat. It yowled and tried to escape, but the poor animal was so skinny that even with its sharp claws, it was no match for Hermione and her thick leather coat and gloves. "Let's go," Hermione said with a satisfied smile. Evelyn extricated herself from the rest of them, and they made the long trek back. "I should have known you'd pick the most difficult one. It is a pitiful little thing." Evelyn held out some food, and Hermione was glad when it carefully took from her fingers. "He has character," Hermione said defensively. Memories of Ron and Crookshanks came to the surface. She should have seen the writing on the wall when he hated her cat so vehemently. Even after Crookshanks was the only reason they were able to root out Pettigrew, Ron had an unerring distaste for her beloved cat, and when Crookshanks had died, Ron had been less than sympathetic. He even had the audacity to mutter "good riddance" when he thought she wasn't listening. Hermione had never wanted to kill someone more. "Yes, of course he does," Evelyn soothed. "And he certainly is the least likely to be picked up, so it's a good thing that you adopted him. I'm not sure how long the poor thing would have survived if you hadn't." He did look sickly. It worried Hermione, but she was a witch, and if anyone could make him better, it was her. "I better take him home," Hermione fussed, "but I'll drop you off before I do." "Could I have some more fish for him?" Evelyn passed Hermione what was left of the bag, and Hermione fussed over him. When Hermione was finished healing him back at home, the cat was purring in appreciation. He was still dreadfully skinny and dirty, but that was easily solved. Hermione decided it would be best to piss off the cat before food rather than after, but in a strange turn of events, the cat loved the water and purred harder than ever. "I certainly did pick a unique and wonderful kitty, didn't I?" Now that its eyes weren't all gummed up with infection, Hermione could see a wonderfully bright pair of green eyes. "I don't think he would mind, so I think I'll call you Harry. Plus, I think you are a better Harry to fall in love with." Harry ate and drank voraciously and then fell asleep on Hermione's bed when he was finished. Hermione smiled with happiness. A cat really was far better than a lover. "You ran, yes, from women because they wanted to have sex with you." "Yes, Lackner, I ran away. Can we talk about anything else? What are you doing?" "I'm checking if you have a penis, Ardith." "No man in his right mind would run away from a willing woman." "Clearly one did, since I am a man, and I did." Adam walked in on Ardith, straining to get Lackner off of him. Ardith was losing the battle. Lackner was quickly growing taller than all the men within the tribe, and swifting, turning into a hulking giant of muscle on top of that. They both scrambled apart at Adam's entrance. "Be understanding, Lackner," Adam said gravely. Maybe Ardith simply didn't have enough cash. "Father," Ardith hissed. "I see. Bring more cash next time, Ardith." "Neither of you are funny," Ardith said with frustration. "Or do you see your virginity as a delicate flower?" Lackner leered. Ardith glared at Lackner wordlessly before stomping away. "I'll take that to be a yes." Ardith ignored his obnoxiously deep voice. He liked Lackner more when they were young boys. The older they got, the more crude he was. Ardith simply couldn't see himself treating a woman in such a way, and didn't see it as such a bad thing either as did the women within the tribe. His mother had not been teasing so much as boasting. Sure, the fact that Ardith had actively run away from the prostitutes was quite humorous. But him not being willing to use them at the drop of a hat was positively heart-warming. All the other women thought so. Ardith was going to have his pick of the girls within the village when he finally settled down. Basma had raised a good man. "Do not listen to Lackner," Basma whispered in his ear. Ardith had stomped his way over to where she was cooking. "Your wife will appreciate your discretion, and you will learn to make her and her alone very happy." Ardith turned a bright red. His mother's words were well meant, but he still didn't want to discuss sex with her any more than he did his father. "I'm going to go train." Ardith rushed out of the tent to Adam's chuckles. "I shall join him," Lackner grinned, before following to no doubt continue his teasing. As soon as the boys were gone, Basma leveled her husband with a chilled glare. "My lovely wife." Adam got up and gave Basma a cautious kiss to the cheek. "You sent my son to follow a foreigner alone." "She was just one woman," Adam tried to reason. "A woman who successfully drew our son into a brothel in a city that he does not know well. She clearly knew he was following her." "But he is all right." Basma slammed her spoon down angrily. "No thanks to you," Basma countered angrily. "And if you ever do such a thing again, I will ensure that every meal that you eat has a special, hidden surprise. I will fulfill your duty as your wife, but life will become very uncomfortable for you. Do you hear me, Adam?" "Of course, Habib." "I promise you, I thought he would be just fine." Basma was only barely appeased. "And don't think that I am unaware of the role Terence played in this. He is the one who called you to Cairo in the first place. I am making everything he hates for family meals in the near future, so he understands that." Adam winced. His wife was absolutely perfect. Respectful, and always showed the elders and men in their tribe their due respect, as was their culture, but Basma knew how to make you feel her displeasure. The things Basma came up with sounded tiny and small, but those tiny, small things added together and grew more and more over time till you begged for forgiveness. Adam was going to be eating fatir baladi at every opportunity Basma could manage. For Basma's purpose, it had the added benefit of being a food both he and Terence greatly disliked for the indigestion it caused them, and Ardith conveniently loved. "I completely understand, Habib." Adam sighed with resignation. Another man was following her. Hermione wasn't surprised, but she did wonder that they didn't realize that whatever this weird uniform that they wore was clearly tipping her off. Ah, well, she wouldn't be the one to tell them. This one was clearly older, and was significantly better at the whole thing. Hermione could honestly say that if they had started with this gentleman, she may not have noticed. However, their initial stupidity was her gain, not that they would have ever really been able to catch her. After all, Hermione was obsessively careful to make sure she was absolutely alone before doing anything remotely magical. And frankly, the poor man never stood a chance. "How are you liking your new cat, Hermione?" "I love him," Hermione beamed. "He warmed right up to me the minute he was treated and bathed. I think he will fatten up in no time." "Is there any chance I can stop by to see him soon?" Evelyn said hopefully. Hermione froze. She couldn't let Evelyn in her house. Evelyn was far too smart. And the measures that Hermione had taken made it impossible for no explanation to be given before entering, let alone afterwards. Evelyn could see panic and fear in Hermione's eyes. She couldn't understand why Hermione didn't want her to see her home, but the very thought clearly terrified her. "How about I bring Harry over to see you?" "I would love that," Evelyn smiled sadly. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. I wish I could bring you to my house, but there is more than one reason why I can't. You are my only friend. I promise you if I could, I would have already brought you there." Evelyn could see the truth in her admission. "I understand. You're always welcome to bring Harry over or stay over if you like," Evelyn offered. Hermione surged forward and gave Evelyn a hug that nearly bowled her over. "I love you so much for that, Evelyn." Evelyn hugged her back. I love you too, oh secretive one. Hasib couldn't understand what was happening. Every day, without fail, he would lose the European woman. He had thought it comical at first that Ardith had been tricked by a mere woman, but now he understood it far too well. The only reasoning Hasib could come up with is that Miss Evans could scale walls. He began looking up the minute she wasn't immediately visible, and swore on his father's grave. He occasionally could hear her laughing at him in those moments. It was baffling. He found that when Miss Evans was with the klutzy woman from the museum, Hasib was able to keep eyes on her easily. He knew where that woman lived. But the minute the two of them parted, Hasib knew that the chase was on and he was losing. 2 weeks. Hasib played this game for 2 weeks before Hermione decided to make her own move. Hermione was bored. Life was a little too static, and she was seriously starting to get annoyed with her ever-present black shadow. Hermione thought after she disappeared into thin air a couple of times he would get the hint. He lasted a whole week longer than she thought he would, and this was getting old. He was getting desperate, more brazen in his attempts to follow her, and Hermione thought that a little prank was in order. Early one morning, she went back to that same brothel that she had tricked the boy into going into. "We don't do that type of pleasuring here," the madame said bluntly. "Oh. No, no, of course not." Hermione blushed brightly. "I'm afraid that I'm here for my husband. He is absolutely insatiable, and I feel that I need a bit of a break." Hermione said it as if she was telling a great secret. "I wanted to surprise him with a gift." Hermione winked and handed over a large sum of money. "He will be following me here later in the afternoon. If you do a good job, I promise that I will be most grateful and ensure he comes here whenever he has the need." The madam raised an eyebrow, but took the money and smiled. "We will do our best." Hermione had allowed him to follow her easily that day, and Hasib had been hesitant to enter the building. Hermione had walked out the back door and immediately apparated to an alley across the street. She saw him finally go in and leaned up against the opposite building to wait with a shit-eating grin. Hasib staggered out the building, desperately holding onto his unraveled keffiyeh and clearly disheveled not long after, and was unbearably confused. The grabbing woman had said his wife had paid them. Farah would never pay for him to have a prostitute, or for that matter, let him live to tell the tale. He did not anger the woman who handled his food. Farah was capable of atrocities. She wasn't a close friend with a dam's own terrifying wife for no reason. "Not your cup of tea." Hasib's neck cracked as he whipped his head up to see his target casually leaning against a wall. "Maybe I should marry one of your men," Miss Evans said with seriousness. "That aversion for sex work is sadly a rare quality. Amusing results for me, though," she chuckled. "You," Hasib pointed at her accusingly. "You're better than the last one," Hermione said serenely. "I'll see you around." Hasib didn't even try to follow her. What would be the point? Miss Evans would just vanish into thin air again, and she clearly knew he was following her. Hasib had to report back. Dr. Bay was going to be furious. Hermione nodded to herself with satisfaction as the man stayed put. That was money well spent. Maybe she had a few days of not being followed until the lovely doctor found somebody else. When Ardith saw Hasib and Uncle Bay riding into the camp, he ran back to their tent and planted himself right next to his mother. "Is there a tent on fire?" Basma questioned with amusement. "Hasib is back." Ardith blushed with embarrassment. "Ah, and you are curious." Ardith nodded. "I'll make sure that you are in the meeting." Basma winked at him and Ardith grinned back. Terence was absolutely fuming when he entered the tent. "Well, you are not the only one who was scared off by a couple of women," Terence grumbled to Ardith. Hasib gave him a glare. "Say that to Farah, and when she invites you to dinner, don't be surprised if she has consulted with the lovely Basma." Hasib bowed respectfully to Basma. "For some tips," Hasib finished meaningfully. Basma smirked before placing a special cup of coffee in front of Terence. He took one sip and he knew. It tasted like dirty water. Terence looked up sharply at Basma, who had an especially sweet smile. Basma placed a deliciously strong cup of coffee in front of Hasib. Hasib smiled wide and gave Basma a nod of thanks after tasting his perfect coffee. Terence put a hand over his eyes. This was why he would never marry. "Let me guess," Terence said with resignation. "Fatir Baladi for dinner." "How did you guess?" Basma said with exuberance. "You must have the gift of foresight." Terence looked at Basma with exhaustion. He had tried to find his way back into his sister-in-law's good graces in the past. It was a waste of time. Terence simply had to let her rage stay its course until she was no longer angry. Adam entered, and Terence gave Ardith a glare. "Don't you have training to be off too?" he said haughtily. Actually, Basma interrupted and placed a basket of potatoes in front of Ardith and a knife. "He has already offered his help to me." Terence looked about to protest, but was interrupted by Adam. "Then let's begin." Ardith peeled potatoes while carefully listening to Hasib's report. He was relieved to hear that Hasib had essentially gathered the exact same information as Ardith, despite having been following Miss Evans for 2 full weeks. Down to following her into the brothel, he had much the same experience. "Are you saying Miss Evans paid prostitutes to accost you?" Adam said with disbelief. "She certainly did, even had a conversation with me after I managed to escape them." "What did she say?" Adam leaned forward eagerly, and Ardith put down the potato he was working on. "She said I was better than the last one that you sent, and that maybe she should marry one of our men because of our rare response to prostitutes." "That's all she said?" Adam asked, surprised. "She also said, 'See you around,'" Hasib said dryly. "Miss Evans knew it was the Medjai who sent you," Terence said with concern. "No, she didn't give any names, very general in her description. Miss Evans was clearly amused that I have been following her around. It was my own fault for not being suspicious that she actually let me follow her to a building. She usually loses me within minutes." Hasib turned to Ardith. "Considering how difficult it was for me, I think that it is safe to say that Ardith never stood a chance of gathering any intel on Miss Evans. We can continue to send men. Hopefully, she will slip up. That is all we can really do." Terence grunted with dissatisfaction. Basma rolled her eyes at him into her cooking pot. Terence was a pain in the ass. Most intellectual men were. Adam was just as intelligent as his brother, but infinitely more humble. However, Terence was loyal and dedicated. He would never betray the Medjai, and that was why he was perfect to keep an eye out within the museum. It was definitely rankling his pride that Miss Evans was so easily evading all their attempts at information. If it wasn't so concerning, Basma would be rooting for her all the way. If only for the entertainment of seeing Terence stew and fester. There is no use going over and over this. Hasib, choose someone to shadow Miss Evans and spend some time with Farah. I'm sure she is anxious to see you. You should eat with us, Hasib. I'm sure that Farah would appreciate some reassurance about what happened in the city. May Allah bless your kindness, Hasib said gratefully. Women, Terence grumbled. More coffee, dear brother, Farah said sweetly, and Terence paled. I believe I should go with Hasib to choose the man to follow Miss Evans. Terence attempted to stand, but was roughly shoved down by Adam. So help me, Terence, you will take your share of suffering. All I have eaten is fatir baladi, every single day. And so help me, it will continue until you have had suitable punishment. So, stay, seated, Adam hissed angrily. Adam had been having a rough 2 weeks. If it wouldn't have started up right back again, he would have run after the first week. However, Adam knew it would simply prolong his wife's displeasure. As did Terence, he was just being a moron. Terence sulked as the meat-filled fry bread was placed in front of him. He was going to pay for this, and there was nothing like traveling across the desert with diarrhea. Nothing. Ardith smiled with his head bowed over the last potato. Father didn't really deserve Mama's rage, but Uncle Terence, completely. But sometimes, Allah's punishments came with casualties. Hermione was in a bad mood. Evelyn thought she was cheerful enough to start, and then the minute that they left the museum, it was like a black cloud descended over her face. Evelyn heard an unintelligible grumble and a sigh. Is everything all right? Evelyn asked with concern. Are you not feeling well? Hermione's face immediately brightened with what Evelyn was quickly recognizing as the expression Hermione would use to comfort Evelyn and fob her off when she wasn't going to answer the question. I am fine. Evelyn's eyes narrowed before she changed their direction for her own home. How about I make you some tea, and I hopefully can get you to tell me what is bothering you? Hermione's eyebrow lifted in that infuriating way that Evelyn was beginning to hate. Oh, really? Hermione drawled. I told you I am fine. Hermione, Evelyn scoffed. I wasn't born yesterday. Neither was I, Hermione grinned. I firmly believe you will overreact if I tell you, therefore I will not tell you. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Hermione Evans, you tell me this instant. Do I look like Jonathan? That's not going to work on me, Hermione laughed. She had met Jonathan a few times since their initial introduction, and it was clear who the de facto parent was when their parents had died. Evie could scold like nobody's business, but then, so could Hermione being Ron and Harry's parents their entire school years and beyond. If Evelyn started with supreme irritation, if I promise not to react. Will you tell me then? Hermione was proud to see that Evelyn had taken on some of her sarcasm in the few months that they had known each other. HMMMMM, Napa. Hermione popped the P obnoxiously, and Evelyn glared at her. She was preparing to rip Hermione a new one when Jonathan walked in reeking of whiskey. Ah, hello, old girl. Jonathan took Hermione's hand and attempted to give her a debonair greeting, but ended up smashing his lips into her hand and nearly falling over in the process. Lovely Hermione, Jonathan said dramatically as righted himself. Jonathan, Evelyn chastised. It's only midday. How can you already be drunk? The key, dear Evie, is drinking the night before and to never stop drinking, Jonathan said with a brilliant smile and dropped into an armchair with an umph. Oh, Jonathan, Evelyn was clearly heartbroken for him. Hermione could see the clear signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. Evelyn had confided to Hermione that Jonathan had never been the same since he fought in the Great War, and Hermione could certainly sympathize. A lot of the survivors of the Hogwarts battle were struggling to live normal, healthy lives, drinking too much, trying their best to just not dwell on the people who were no longer there. Hermione herself was just lucky she never really liked alcohol. Lucky that she was simply a compulsive tea drinker and now coffee drinker. She would stay up for hours and read or bake rather than deal with the nightmares. Sometimes Evelyn would look at her weird after a few days of staying up, and Hermione was fairly certain that Evelyn could see the dark circles for what they really were, the same as Jonathan's. Don't look at me like that, Evie. I'm as happy as a clam. A clam in a flagon of ale, you mean, Hermione joked. Ale, I'm a whiskey boy all the way, Lady Hermione. Jonathan's words were getting more and more slurred the longer he talked. How about I make the tea? Hermione stood up. And you help clean Jonathan up. Do you have any bread, Evelyn? I'm sure that will help with the nausea when he wakes up. Thank you, Hermione. Evie helped Jonathan to his feet and began to navigate him to the bed. When Hermione finally got there with the tea and bread, Evelyn was doing her best to shake Jonathan awake despite his determination to pass out. Hermione immediately strode forward and poked him straight in the eye. Yow! Why would you do such a blasphemous thing? Eat the bread and drink the tea, or I will do it again. Jonathan attempted to protest before Hermione took a warning step back towards him, and he immediately rushed to take a bite of bread. Hermione's mean, Evie, Jonathan whined petulantly. And God bless her for it, Evelyn said with relief. After they had forced enough tea and bread down Jonathan's gullet, they finally left him to pass out in his bed. Well, that was fun, Hermione said sarcastically. Evelyn chuckled tearfully. It's a very normal response to being a soldier, Evelyn. It would be stranger and possibly more concerning if Jonathan wasn't affected at all. He cares, but it's painful to care, so he drinks. I just wish there was something I could do, Evelyn said sadly. Making sure he doesn't drown in his own vomit is always helpful. Not funny, Evelyn scrubbed her eyes. Sorry, bad joke. I'd give you advice, but the only reason I'm not doing the same thing is because alcohol is nasty. I just drink tea and never go to sleep. I switch to coffee when the tea starts to make me sleepy, so it would be like a mute teaching a deaf person to speak. Hermione was like Jonathan. Now that Evelyn thought about it, Hermione always looked tired, but abnormally alert at the same time. And when no one was looking, she looked haunted. Jonathan gave the thorough impression of being completely incapable, but always had a little pistol hidden away on his person. Evelyn had never even stopped to wonder if Hermione was a soldier, but all the signs pointed towards it. It was just Hermione was a woman, so what army would have allowed her to be a soldier? I don't understand. Evelyn was far too perceptive. Hermione could see the wheels turning in her head. Hermione should really have thought through what she was saying before she said it. It's all right, Hermione got up. It's not really something that can be understood with the information I've given you. I'll get you some tea. I brought some cake. Sure, Evelyn said, clearly distracted. So, what was bothering you? You seemed fine until we left the museum. Curse Evelyn and her excellent memory. I'll make a deal with you, Evelyn. You drop what we were talking about forever and I'll tell you. That's hardly fair, Evelyn glared. That's my deal. Take it or leave it. Evelyn scrunched up her nose. Fine, she said begrudgingly. I'm being followed by men dressed in black. I beg your pardon, Evelyn said, shocked. I'm being followed by men in black. This is the third one they have sent. I suppose they are trying to find out where I live. Still haven't yet, Hermione grinned. It's just annoying, she ended simply. Hence my irritation. I ran off the last one 2 days ago. I was hoping that I would have another 2 or 3 days to not deal with them. Evelyn was clearly speechless. Yow, they were following yous outside the museum, Hermione nodded. It usually starts at the museum. They really have no idea where I live, but they've figured out that I go to the museum every day. I generally lose them after we separate. Hermione, Evelyn burst out. How can you not be more worried? Because I'm pretty sure I know who is having them follow me, and he's just being a nosy little shit. They have never tried to approach me. I'm almost 100% positive that they are just gathering intel. I scared the last two off. So they sent another one, and they still didn't understand that the clothing was a huge tip-off. Hermione would have welcomed the barest of challenges. She was unbearably bored. Evelyn could only spend so much time with her, and Hermione was clearly in need of some mental stimulation. How did you scare them off? Evelyn raised her eyebrows when Hermione began to grin evilly. The first one freaked out when I tricked him into going into a brothel. He was clearly young and had probably never been in a place like that before. The second one wasn't freaked out by the brothel so much as the fact that I actually went to the trouble to pay a prostitute for my voracious husband so I could get some sleep. Evelyn's mouth dropped in shock. Now, Hermione sighed. I'd feel better if I had another idea to get this one off my back. I am not in the habit of pranking people, but when I do, I don't settle for anything other than perfection. I'll need to think of something that doesn't have anything to do with a brothel so I can really throw him off his game. You are absolutely mad. Thank you for noticing, Hermione said with a grin. Essentially, I've got this handled. It isn't the first time, and for the most part, I feel that this will be a fun experience, just as long as the ideas keep flowing. I would like some cake now, Evelyn said with a shake of her head. Of course. Hermione got Evelyn a plate of honey cake and placed it in front of her. Evelyn moaned at the taste. As long as you keep baking for me, I don't care how crazy you are, Evelyn said with appreciation. That is a great source of solace, Hermione said dryly. I brought someone, Hermione called into Evelyn's house as she let herself in. Your fan isn't with you, is he? Not unless you mean Harry. If you mean the man in black, well, I haven't been to the museum, so no. But he might show up on your street after a little bit of me not showing up. Evelyn walked in and nearly tripped on a side table because she was trying to read and walk at the same time. Thankfully, she was able to right herself and immediately squealed with delight at the black cat in Hermione's arms. He looks so much better, Harry dug his claws deep into Hermione's shoulder as Evelyn reached out to him. Sorry, Hermione huffed. I haven't tried taking him out in public yet. I'll need to get him a leash if he continues responding like this. Harry is not a dog, Hermione, Evelyn chastised with her hands on her hips. Really? Because I thought he was the spitting image of a Jack Russell Terrier, Hermione returned sarcastically. Ooh, I hate cats. Both the women glared at Jonathan for his exclamation. Consider our pending engagement over Jonathan Carnahan. The Medjai listening just outside the window's eyebrows flew up. Some sort of soldier and engaged to the worst archaeologist in Cairo. This was much more information than Hazib was able to obtain. None of them heard him temporarily lose his foothold, none of them, that except Harry. The cat became suddenly calm and was focused intently on the window, but none of the people inside noticed. You would end our timeless romance for a cat. What kind of dedicated fiancé are you? Jonathan returned, whilst throwing his arm across his eyes dramatically. The kind with a cat rather than a father wielding a shotgun. That is a wonderful point in favor of the cat, Jonathan said while stroking his chin. Here, kitty, kitty. I'll give you some fish if you're nice and approve of me and Hermione's budding romance. Harry! There was little to no warning for the Medjai when the cat flew at him like a demon sent straight from hell. He was frantically trying to get the scratching beast off of him, but unfortunately lost his footing and fell down from the third story right onto his back. Hermione and the Carnahans ran to the window to see a proud Harry licking his paws clean after his victory, and a man in black robes, attempting to recover from having the breath thoroughly knocked out of him from his painful landing. That's what you get for being too nosy, Hermione called out the window before picking up Harry. I think you deserve a very nice treat, beautiful boy. He certainly has, Evelyn cooed. Harry purred loudly as both of the women scratched behind his one ear. Jonathan cautiously started to pet his tail, which immediately started twitching at his touch. Like I said, I'll give you some very nice fish, Youch. He bit me. Papa has spoken. Too bad, Jonathan, Evelyn said solemnly. Rats! They closed the window and sat down around the table. So, how much do you think they heard? Evelyn said with concern. Probably everything, Hermione said calmly. I don't jolly well like the thought of those cads gripping the ledge of our bloody window sill to eavesdrop on our every word, Jonathan said grumpily. There has to be something we can do, Evelyn mused. I've got an idea that might work, Hermione said. Marvelous. What's the plan? Jonathan said exuberantly. You got any oil on you, Evelyn? It was several days before the Medjai was sure that the Europeans were no longer watching out for his presence outside the window, but to be safe, he would sneak in the house and find an alcove to lurk in so that they didn't catch him the way they had before. He climbed down the side of the building from the roof easily enough, but the minute that his feet hit the window sill, he was down. Evelyn heard the loud thump and the pained cursing. It seems someone has fallen off the side of the building, Evelyn said conversationally. It would appear so, Hermione smiled into her cup of tea. I'll probably need to buy some more oil, Evelyn smirked. That's a fine idea, Evelyn. Adam raised an eyebrow at the injured Medjai across from him. The young man in front of him was clearly embarrassed and more than a little humbled. You didn't think it would be a bad idea to climb through the window after you had already gotten caught and defeated by Miss Evans' cat. I waited a few days for their guard to go down, the younger Medjai defended. And they had greased the window sill so that you would slip and nearly break your leg. We'll have to warn anyone else who attempts to follow them in the future. You may go rest. You'll need to recover. Thank you, the man bowed to his chief and limped out. Terence had his head in his hands next to Adam. Well, she was a soldier and she is engaged. That is something, Adam said optimistically. Don't forget the guard cat, Terence interjected sarcastically. Adam began chuckling. This isn't funny, Adam. It is absolutely ridiculous that we can't keep track of one woman, though it is turning out to be a wonderful training opportunity. I didn't think it needed to be said that going on the window sill after his first failed attempt was not advisable. Terence finally cracked a smile and started to chuckle with a damn. I suppose you can't take common sense for granted. Basma placed Terence's coffee down in front of him, and he looked at her askance before taking a cautious sip. His entire body sagged in relief to taste a delicious cup of coffee. His punishment was over. "Thank you, Basma," Terence said sincerely. "You're welcome, brother," Basma smirked before going back to her cooking. "Well," Terence said with resignation after he had finished his coffee, "I better go select another Medjai. Hopefully, this one won't be bested by a cat and a bit of oil." Ardith raised his eyebrows as he entered during Terence's last sentence, but Terence kept up his pace and left the tent with only a nod to Ardith. "Oil," Ardith said with confusion. 2 years. It had been 2 years since Hermione had her time-traveling incident. She was so incredibly grateful. Hermione had never felt so happy and content with her life, and despite her sleeping issues, she really did feel that life was going good for her. Hermione would work 1 or 2 days a week in magical Cairo at a bookstall to save money and not use too much of her fortune. She was paid to read books. What was better than that? Hermione was getting closer and closer with Evelyn, and Jonathan when he was around, that is. The men in black were certainly hardy. They had not let up an iota, so Hermione began treating the inconvenience as her own personal training exercise of sorts. Hermione would always throw them off in the end, but she worked hard at improving her escaping skills without the aid of magic. It was a humbling experience at first. Hermione was heaving giant gulps of air only minutes after the first time she had done it. She had always prided herself on doing things the Muggle way. Hermione had a long way to go, and it was very humbling. So, for at least the first couple of minutes, she would attempt to outrun them. Hermione even began learning to actually scale buildings in order to get away. And when she began to tire of the game, then Hermione would pull out all the stops. There was really nothing she hadn't done to them. The traditional buckets of unsavory liquids falling on their heads as they walked through an archway, sneaking catnip into their pocket, and then walking to where the alley cats congregated and watching them swarm all over him. Leading a man onto a boat just to apparate off and wave to him as he sailed to Cyprus. Tripping hexes, that man had certainly looked befuddled and royally frustrated beyond belief. Hermione was actually growing fond of them. She saw them almost as friends, which was a bit weird and unhinged, but she had fun with them. And Hermione could occasionally see the grin on their faces when the younger ones thought they were catching up to her. So the feeling was at least partially shared between them. "So you are still dealing with the men in black, I see." An older gentleman was sitting on the other end of the cafe from them, still in black. "When do you think that they will learn not to wear black?" Hermione whispered. "I really want to win that bet with Jonathan, but I only have a few more months before he wins by default." Evelyn rolled her eyes. "If they haven't realized by now, will they ever?" "You make an accurate, pessimistic point. Maybe I need to help the scales tip in my favor." Hermione picked up her cup of coffee and walked over to the other table and brazenly sat next to the Medjai, attempting to appear to be reading his newspaper. "You all make one mistake." Hermione took a painfully long sip of her coffee, and Nasir stared in shock at her. He had barely gotten there. How could Miss Evans have already pegged him for the one who was following her? "And what mistake is that?" "You know, I would love to tell you, but I am currently trying to win a bet with Jonathan Carnahan. If you all don't figure it out within the next month or two, then I have to shell out a significant amount of cash. I am just hoping you will change out of it so that I can see the look on Jonathan's face." Hermione picked up her coffee and nabbed his newspaper. "I actually read the newspaper, not just pretend to read it." Nasir's mouth dropped in disbelief as she walked away. "Was I too obvious?" Hermione asked Evelyn as she sat down. "No, you were almost too subtle." "Well," Hermione sighed, "hopefully they turn out to be smart." "I wouldn't count on it." Evelyn snatched the newspaper out of Hermione's hands. "That was rude." "I stole that fair and square," Hermione pouted. "You're right. If they haven't figured it out by now, they never will." Nasir did his best to memorize exactly what Miss Evans said before abruptly leaving and walking to the museum to make his report. Adam watched his son sparring with Lackner. Finally, Ardith was coming into his own body. Ardith was not nearly as giant as Lackner, but he had grown significantly in the last 2 years. Him and Lackner would be ready to enter the Guards soon. They were well matched in their fight. Lackner's brute strength and Ardith's natural cunning were evenly matched. In the end, Lackner won, but Adam was incredibly proud of how far his son had come. "I have bested you again," Lackner said with a cocky grin. "One of these days, I'm going to wipe that smile right off your face," Ardith grumbled. "Keep dreaming." Lackner bowled Ardith over onto the ground with an unexpected shove which had him bursting into throaty laughter. "I would say that you are both ready to be initiated soon. You just have to do your last challenge," Adam said with satisfaction. Following the marble, essentially a CNT, Lackner had a sneer of distaste, and Adam looked at him in outrage. "Do not refer to a woman as such in front of me again, Lackner," Adam said angrily. Lackner bowed his head begrudgingly. "You will both come with me to Cairo tomorrow." However, that can be changed. Adam had never felt such cold anger. Miss Evans had been the source of much amusement, and her antics and intelligence had earned his respect. Miss Evans had successfully tricked, teased, and humbled every single one of the Medjai he had sent after her. She was single-handedly improving the quality of their soldiers. It was becoming one of his most valued training exercises for the Medjai to follow her. The younger generation were currently competing to see who could defeat her, and Adam always took guilty pleasure in hearing her current escapades. Just the week previous, Miss Evans had staged a huge scene at the cafe that she was followed to. She ran up to one of the younger Medjai that had just that week been boasting about his impending success and threw a glass of water right into his face and started screaming about how dare he do this to her. Didn't their tryst mean anything to him? In Arabic, no less. Which they had not known she spoke. He had floundered and ran as she started tossing random drinks on him. No one had come to his rescue. They had been too busy enjoying the show. He came back with his tail in between his legs and was enduring endless mocking from his fellow soldiers. It was now an unspoken rule that if you wanted to become a full-fledged Medjai, you had to withstand the duty of following Hermione Evans. Lackner had been growing increasingly arrogant, and Adam was having doubts about his future within the Medjai. Lackner had a streak of meanness to him that bordered on cruelty. It was true that the Medjai were forced to kill in order to protect the location of the sacred city, but Lackner didn't see it as a duty and burden so much as an underestimated pleasure. Lackner didn't go so far as to say it out loud, but during sparring, he had an air of satisfaction about him any time his partner was injured, accidentally. Adam would need to see how he acted after he followed Miss Evans. Maybe the experience would change his attitude for the better, and Adam would see a better side to him in general after his no-doubt humbling experience. As soon as Adam had left, Lackner scoffed rudely. "That woman is an outsider. She deserves none of my respect," Lackner sneered. "Lackner," Ardith said reprovingly. "And she isn't just an outsider," Lackner continued angrily. "Miss Evans is an invader. If they couldn't determine she was a threat, they should have taken care of her long ago. Lackner, we can't just start killing random people in Cairo. That wouldn't be protecting the city. It would be at the best murder and at the worst systematic genocide. And what would be so wrong with that?" Lackner coldly challenged. Ardith listened to him with open-mouthed disbelief as he continued. "Letting this white foreigner play pranks on our men and making fools of us. For what? To humble us," Lackner mocked. "We are descendants of Pharaoh's sacred bodyguards. We should be acting like it. Why don't you say something?" Lackner accused Ardith. "Are you going to let our culture continue to degrade until we are licking the boots of these esteemed foreigners?" Ardith could feel red-hot anger beginning to course through his veins. "You are out of line, Lackner. You are not the chief." "Oh, my apologies, future chief," Lackner said uglily. "Whatever is easiest for you, your future highness." Lackner deliberately slammed his shoulder into Ardith, causing him to stumble back as he stomped off. Ardith didn't know what to do with Lackner anymore. He didn't know him anymore. Lackner was starting to say strange things, constantly complaining about the tourists and the white immigrants and the foreign legions posted within Cairo. And it was more than complaining. Lackner was talking about killing them off, and Ardith was quickly losing faith that he wouldn't actually go through with it. Ardith had no idea what to do about it. Did he give him a chance to get over it? Did he tell his father? There was no way he could really fix the issue. Either way, he betrayed his father or Lackner. And Lackner was already so hateful, was it really much of a betrayal anymore? There was only one person he could think of that could possibly give him proper advice. Alumu, Basma turned to her son. Ardith. Basma was immediately concerned. Ardith looked worried and nervous. Her son was never nervous around her. It must be serious. I don't know what to do. Adam knew something was wrong when he walked into their tent, and Basma was sitting at the table doing nothing. There was no drink in front of her, and she was staring at the entryway to the tent, waiting for him. Either he had done something, or she knew of someone who had. Please sit, Habibai. Adam considered her serious expression before sitting down right next to her and softly taking her hand. Something is wrong, my love. Basma didn't say anything for a moment. Ardith came to me for advice on a matter. Adam waited patiently while she considered her words. He has heard some concerning opinions from Lackner about the foreigners, about them being intruders. Many of the Medjai feel this way, Adam interjected softly. I am aware, Basma agreed. But Ardith is concerned that Lackner is willing to start some sort of mission to kill and drive them out. Has Lackner expressly tried to start anything? Basma shook her head. Not exactly, but he has been getting more and more hostile towards Ardith for taking the easy way and letting our culture degrade. I assured Ardith that I would come to you and we would take action if needed. What do you think? Adam looked down thoughtfully. I think that we should continue with our trip tomorrow and give him the chance to change his mind. It could be just talk. Adam hoped that he was right. And so long as he follows orders, there shouldn't be a problem. We will keep a closer eye on him. It would be wrong to act on opinions that he expressed in private. He is still young. He could just be letting his mouth get away from him. If his aggression continues to progress or doesn't improve after tomorrow, I will put his initiation into the Medjai on hold until he gets it under control. Basma let out a deep breath of relief. I'll let Ardith know. She got up and gave Adam a kiss on the forehead. Are you sure Lackner should go to Cairo? Keeping him here will just make him resentful, and if it turns out that he was just talking rashly, then it could cause problems between him and Ardith when Ardith eventually becomes chief. I would like to avoid that if possible. You're a good father, Basma smiled fondly and returned to the kitchen. Ardith was relieved to find out he was worrying about nothing. At least, Lackner wouldn't be adversely affected until they had actual evidence to go off of. Hopefully, it was all talk and they could eventually put it behind them. It was all going to be okay. It was an awkward trip to Cairo. Lackner was cold and Ardith could feel how detached he was. When they had finally reached the museum, Terence greeted them from the back entrance. Miss Carnahan is here. Miss Evans hasn't arrived yet. We have time to hear Nasir's report before you send the first one to follow her. Lackner was emotionless throughout the entirety of the report. A mistake we are all making, Adam said wonderingly. She just could be messing with your mind. That is true, Nasir admitted, but it is worth thinking about. Adam nodded. He looked at Lackner. Lackner had been silent for the majority of the trip, extremely difficult to read. He should go first so Adam could assess his response to the task while Ardith followed her. Lackner, you are going first. Gather any information you can. Lackner nodded almost imperceptibly before going out on the street. Gather information. He would gather information all right, and he would do it in a way that determined his success. Ardith stared after Lackner. Something didn't feel right. Hermione saw the hulking giant of a man as she walked up the steps to the museum and rolled her eyes. Were they even trying to pick people who were actually able to hide? And besides, if he glared any harder, his face was going to get stuck that way. Someone was testy. Hermione decided to ignore him for the day and just have a good time with Evelyn. It was far too soon after the last man in black to have any creative juices flowing in her mind anyhow. Plus, there was something off with this one. Hermione, look what I found in the market. Evelyn was wielding a flowery parasol. It was gaudy, and Hermione had never seen an accessory with more flowers. It looked like something Dolores Umbridge may have liked. It's special, Hermione said with a tight smile. Oh, come now. I know it's a bit over the top. But I think that if I just dress it up or change the material, it would be nice. It has a good frame, and I got a good price for it. All right, I'll have to take your word for it, Hermione smiled. May I carry books, madame? Hermione said with a flourish, and offered her free arm like a gentleman. Of course you can, good sir. Hermione thought it was strange that the new man in black was not outside when they passed by. Odd, there was a new man in black out here when I went in. Maybe he is trying a different approach, Evelyn ventured. So long as he isn't gripping your window seals, I suppose. It was only once they reached the alley that Hermione found out why. She had no chance to defend herself as she was yanked away from a screaming Evelyn and pinned to the wall by her throat. Hermione immediately felt the lack of air and could clearly see the smirking cold eyes of the man in front of her. Hermione clawed at the hands holding on to her, but they didn't budge. She desperately and accurately kicked him in the crotch a few times before his eyes narrowed even further and his hold on her became even tighter. He was crushing her throat. Hermione was finally able to breathe painfully as she felt his hold suddenly slacken when a parasol stabbed him in the side. He roared, but Evelyn continued to wail on him relentlessly and desperately. Hermione pulled the cursed dagger that had killed Darby out from her cloak as he let go of her to grab the end of the parasol and slashed him in the stomach and dashed for Evelyn. Hermione grabbed Evie and began to run with her back to the museum, but the behemoth of a man was still going. Hermione felt a rush of fear run through her as she glanced back and saw him still coming after them. Hermione threw a wordless, tripping hex, and thankfully he went down. They were able to make it to the museum and successfully slam the doors behind them. Hermione! Oh, Hermione! Hermione didn't move as Evelyn reached for her collar and unbuttoned it to see the already blackening bruising of giant hands. Hermione began to cough violently and was alarmed to see specks of blood on her hands. We need to get Dr. Bay, Evelyn said with horror, before firmly grabbing Hermione's arm to lead her to the esteemed doctor's office. Hermione didn't know what to do. She didn't want to see Dr. Bay. Had he ordered her to be killed? It was too late to stop Evelyn. Hermione could feel that she wouldn't be able to talk effectively, let alone argue. She tried to pull out of Evelyn's grasp, but was met with an unfortunately firm hold. The men were met with a shocking scene moments later. Dr. Bay couldn't believe what he was seeing when a disheveled Evelyn stormed into his office with a reluctant Miss Evans quite literally being dragged behind. Hermione was attacked. Hermione discreetly pulled her wand out and hid it in her pocket. She had a bloody dagger in one hand and her wand in the other. She is coughing up blood, Dr. Bay. I'm not a medical doctor, Miss Carnahan. Despite that fact, Dr. Bay took a step towards Hermione, but was surprised by the subsequent step backwards. Hermione. We need to make sure you are okay. Hermione watched Evelyn with one eye and the men with the other. W. Hermione began to cough violently again. W. Water. Of course, Hermione. Please let the doctor look at you while I get it. Evelyn walked out, and Hermione waited until the door closed behind her. Dr. Bay felt the breath leave his body. That feeling that he always got around Miss Evans, it was worse now, so much worse. It was almost like he could feel her anger surrounding him and squeezing the breath from him. She was staring at them with rage. You, Hermione rasped out. You ordered me killed. The Medjai were shocked. No, Adam burst out. Hermione looked at him with hard eyes. We would never harm an innocent person for no good reason. The feeling was suffocating, and then it suddenly slackened as Hermione let herself fall against the wall and sheathed her dagger. Then Hermione began to cough violently. "You sent one sick puppy to follow me." Ardith felt guilt wash over him. Lackner had done it. He had tried to eliminate the invader. "Sick puppy," Dr. Bay said with confusion. "Lackner," Adam said darkly. He carefully approached Hermione, and she only just held her ground. "We will take care of him, Miss Evans." Hermione finally nodded after deciding that he was probably telling the truth. "Nasir, we will go get him." "Wait." Adam turned back to Hermione to see her holding out a tiny container of salve. He took it with confusion. "The blade, it's poisoned. He will bleed out if you don't use this on it. I got his stomach." Adam's eyes widened with surprise, but he took it before nodding sharply and walking out. Hermione ignored the rest of the men and began to root in her tiny bag until she found the essence of divinity. You weren't supposed to drink it, but it didn't have any toxic ingredients. It must have some sort of side effect, but Hermione would rather not be coughing up blood. She quickly gulped some of it down and immediately felt the effects when she was able to breathe deeply again. "Has the doctor looked at you?" Evelyn walked back in with the water, and Hermione took it gratefully. "I was just about to." Dr. Bay walked up cautiously and was thankful that Miss Evans didn't back away this time. She even allowed him to lead her to a couch to sit her down. He looked at her neck in wonderment. Whatever Miss Evans had just drank must be some sort of miracle. The black marks were already starting to fade away from her neck. "That must be some medicine," he muttered. Ardith stood morosely against the wall. "I think she will be fine, Miss Carnahan. Miss Evans just needs to get some sleep." She was coughing up blood. Evelyn was bordering on hysterical. "I'm fine, Evelyn." "Oh no, you aren't." Evelyn was crying. "You almost died in front of me." "Well, it's a good thing I had a shield maiden armed with a parasol to defend me, isn't it?" Hermione tried to stand up to give Evelyn a hug, but immediately fell down. Her head felt fuzzy. "I think," she slurred, "I'm beginning to feel the unknown side effects of the medicine I just took." Evelyn rushed forward. "Are you okay?" "I feel drunk, which is weird. I was only drunk that one time." Hermione shoved her finger too hard into Evelyn's chest. "I swore never again." "What do you mean unknown side effects, Miss Evans? Why then did you take it?" Dr. Bay began to check her pulse. She was breathing all right. "Not supposed to. Drink it," Hermione sang. She was slouching until she laid down on the couch. "Then why did you, Doctor?" Bay was seriously becoming concerned, and Evelyn was crying harder than ever. Hermione was drunker than a skunk and waved his concern off literally. "Ingredients aren't bad for you. Just make you drunk, apparently." Dr. Bay scrubbed his face with his hand. He prayed to Allah that it was true. The last thing he needed on his conscience was a dead woman on his couch. "I don't want to go to sleep," Hermione said suddenly. "I feel sleepy, and sleep is just full of nightmares. Don't make me go to sleep, Evie." "You need sleep, Hermione," Evelyn sighed while wiping at her eyes. "You can't make me," Hermione said petulantly. "Miss Carnahan," Dr. Bay interrupted. "Why don't we take care of Miss Evans, and I take you to your lodgings? I doubt you want to try to walk her to your home in this state, and we will ensure no one harms her until she is able to make her way to her own home safely." Evelyn was clearly hesitant to leave Hermione there, but he was right. There was no way Evelyn could take Hermione home, and the men knew where she lived anyhow. It was best not to move her until Hermione was fully aware again. "If anything happens to her, Terence Bay," Evelyn said aggressively, "I will begin deliberately destroying things. And screeching in your face any time I tell you anything." It was sad that was the best threat in her arsenal, though it was at least partially effective. "I assure you, Miss Carnahan, my nephew is more than capable of protecting Miss Evans until I get back." Dr. Bay nodded to Ardith and then left. Ardith immediately locked the office door and looked in bafflement as Miss Evans was sitting upside down with her legs crossed at the top of the couch and her curly hair hanging free. "Miss Evans, you should lay down and sleep." "I refuse," she scoffed. Ardith sighed and sat down next to her. What dreams could be so bad you avoid sleep? His words were halting and his accent was thick, but Ardith felt that he did fine enough, and Miss Evans seemed to understand. She looked at him with a haunted look. You haven't seen death yet, have you? Ardith's eyebrows furrowed together. Death? I've seen a man feast on a dead classmate's corpse, Hermione said simply. Ardith's eyes widened in shock. I've waited in horrifying anticipation for the worst possible news. I've been abandoned at my lowest point. I've been, Hermione gulped back tears. Tortured. I can still smell her. It's why I bake so much. There is nothing like fresh baked sweets to overpower the memory of the smell of rotten teeth and the reek of her awful perfume. How could she have thought that was an attractive smell? No wonder even old Tommy didn't want her. Ardith began to lose track of what she was saying as it got more ridiculous, no doubt because of the drunken effect of the medicine. If a snake man doesn't want you, you have to know something isn't working. I mean, get your teeth fixed. If my parents had ever seen her, they would have forcefully tied her down and fixed that awful set of graying nastiness. Hermione's arms were flailing empathetically, and Ardith smiled indulgently. You know, you look familiar, Hermione said suddenly. Have you followed me before? Ardith immediately blushed, and it hit her like a freight train, and Hermione began laughing hysterically. Oh, Merlin, it's you. Ardith rubbed his neck with embarrassment. I am so sorry. I thought it would give Mr. Bay a conniption. I didn't mean to scare the crap out of you. I am still teased about that, Ardith groaned. It was sweet, Hermione said honestly. Ardith glared at her. I was 18. Hermione burst into hysterical giggles. Hermione yawned. She uncharacteristically shoved her head onto Ardith's lap and curled up on the couch. Miss Evans, I'll get up so you can sleep. Be my pillow, Hermione said sleepily. There was going to be no end to her embarrassment when she woke, but for now he smelled like sandalwood. It was pleasant. Ardith blushed brighter than ever. He had never been this intimate with a woman. It wasn't in their culture to touch women until you were married to one or if you were paying them. And clearly, Ardith wasn't in either of those situations. Miss Evans looked and smelled like honey and tea. Ardith could see the sign of more scars on her chest where her collar was still open. Miss Evans certainly had been a warrior. Where and when was still impossible to determine, but Ardith knew he had heard far more than she ever would have shared willingly if she wasn't drunk off of her medicine. Should he keep it to himself? Ardith hesitatingly stroked her hair. Why would Lackner ever willingly hurt her so callously?